Touchy today, Mr. Chairman. Must be allergy season.
It probably is.
All that nose scratching you doing.
We're going to wait for John. Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first Planning Commission meeting of 2019, January 22nd meeting. 2019 is going to be a year of 55-minute meetings, right? That's the new rule. No more than 55 minutes, right? Let's see how we do tonight.
I can use the timer. When I hit the buzzer, you have to make a motion.
I like that.
Okay.
I like that idea. All right. Okay, so we'll call me daughter. Let's start with the roll call attendance, please.
Thank you, Chair Downey. Community Development Director Jennifer Carmen.
Here.
Assistant City Attorney Cynthia Hassan.
Here.
Chair Downey.
Here.
Commissioners Muller. Tonda.
Here.
Habib.
Here.
Munoz Morris.
Here.
And could you also declare the posting of the agenda, please?
Tonight's meeting agenda was duly noticed and posted in accordance with Government Code Section 54954.2.
Very good. And everybody could stand, please. Let's join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Juan, do you mind leading us off, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, before we get into our agenda proper, we do have an open public comment period. This is for anybody in attendance that would like to address the Planning Commission on any items that are within the purview of the Planning Commission, but not on tonight's agenda. Do we have any speaker cards?
There are no speaker cards.
Is there anybody that wishes to speak on any topic not on our agenda? I'll take that as a no. Okay, so we'll close the public comment period. All right, orders of the day, commissioners. Any changes? Everything look good? All good?
I just had a question. So therefore, I probably pull both meeting minutes, and it just had to do with absences. Are we reporting on our these agenda items if a person is excused or not?
We're supposed to, right?
You mean, it was noted at last meeting.
You mean excused as opposed to absent?
Correct. Well, an excused absent is different than an absent.
Right.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if it's not noted in the minutes, it was certainly noted in the meeting last time.
It's noted in the official record on the video.
Yeah.
Okay, so our standard is we will not be including it in the written minutes.
We certainly can if requested, but typically no.
I would just suggest that it just be added to the minutes, and in that case, I had requested absence for both of these meetings. I was out of the country.
So so if we're referring to the minutes, December 11th, you're showing as absent.
Correct. I apologize. Yeah, I was in the Caribbean.
Okay, and what is your question then? It says
the request is that on the minutes next to excused, it's excused absent. I'm sorry, absent excused.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it. Is there a reason why we don't do that?
Well, I'm not sure the system lets you, I don't think they have a section for that, but we can put a note in for sure.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and take care of that.
Got that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I'd just like to note that the video is the official record of the meeting, and what we do are action minutes, but we'll go ahead and take care of that note anyways.
Okay, thank you. All right, so okay with the agenda as posted? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So let's start with agenda item 1, which is the minutes of the December 11th meeting. So, any discussion? We have a motion for approval. Mm-hmm. What do you want to do? You want to take a note on that, guys?
We can take a note on that and check on that.
Okay, great, okay.
So I'd make a motion. One more speaker needs to be added to that item.
I think it's supposed to say on the beach in the Caribbean. Is that what it's supposed to say?
On a boat.
On a boat? Okay, and what was the other one, Joe? And
Well, one was Wayne's thing, and it sounded like staff may have to address it slightly different way. And my other one is just a request to double check the speaker list for agenda item 4.
okay, all right.
Is that a motion? I'll second it.
Motion second. Any other comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I abstain.
Okay, so it's 4-0, one abstain. Got that, Gina?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, agenda item number 2. Gina? By the way, we have no screen in front of us here, Gina. First, oh, we do now. Yeah, okay.
You don't,
It was blank there a second
don't
ago.
have it?
No, it
Oh,
was
okay.
blank. Yeah.
Good evening, Gina Paulini, Principal Planner. So this is a new one for you this year. Start the new year with a new type of project. This is an exempt RDCS project for the downtown. So the project that they are requesting is acceptance of the RDCS evaluation, the award of 49 downtown RDCS residential building allotments, and a recommendation of their development agreement to the City Council. So you've probably heard about the discussion of the project. It's here at the Hale Lumber site, and they're proposing several public benefits for the project. We're not going to really get into the project tonight, but I am showing you the site plan for the project. It's within Block 6 and 8 of the Morgan Hill Downtown Specific Plan area. So just a little bit about the downtown RDCS exempt area. We have 500 allotments that are set aside for the downtown. 100 of those allotments can be given away every year. Competition is not required, and the Planning Commission does award those allotments. The evaluation. So the projects within the downtown must comply with the RDCS competition manual criteria. They must score 80%, so that's the 160, and they must receive a minimum score in the affordable housing criteria, with the 18 points for sale project and 10 points for rental projects. So it's just similar to all other RDCS projects. For this particular project, they came through the preliminary review process. That's a requirement for all projects. They scored 104. So they took those comments that we provided, our whole entire team provided, and they've come back through the process with their final review and have scored 164. So they've met the 80%, and they've committed to 30 points in the affordable category. So they've met that criteria as well. So we have 100 allotments for this year. It's the first cut of the 500. It's the first project in the downtown set aside, and they're requesting 49. So they qualify and are eligible for downtown set asides. We provided the findings for the development agreement. We are recommending that the City Council approve a development agreement for these allotments. The public benefits that you see within the narrative tonight have been incorporated in that development agreement. I'm not going to go through these. If you have any questions, I can answer them. So tonight we're recommending that the Planning Commission award 49 downtown allotments and recommend that the City Council approve a development agreement for the project. And happy to answer any questions.
I'd also like to add, thank you, Gina. This, not only is this the first one that you've seen as an exempt project lately, this is also the first one using the newly revised narrative that has to be objective. All the subjective point determinations have been taken out of that narrative. So it's really, staff goes through and check boxes, making sure that they can fit it. We don't really have a whole lot of subjective determinations that can be made. And we've talked about that before. I just wanted to remind the commissioners.
Okay.
And then the other thing I wanted to explain is that we're not going to get into the project tonight, but the Planning Commission will be seeing the project. This project is in the downtown, and site review is required to come back to the Planning Commission.
Okay. I do have a few questions, but I'll keep them to the end. Let me open it up to commissioners first. Any questions?
And the applicant is also here. So.
I do have some questions for you, Gina, but
Sure.
Maybe two. The first is, I think, just to clarify then what we are here to speak about. Questions regarding the relationship of this project to grade separations or the realignment of the depot would not be appropriate?
No, this is
Okay.
just strictly on, has the project met the requirements of the RDCS, and they've met the minimum score, and does the Planning Commission agree with the development agreement? So
Great.
it's not, this is not the project discussion. That will
Okay.
be coming to you later.
Then the question I had regarding the process, how they qualified. They initially came in at 104.
Correct.
And they walked out the door at 164.
Correct.
Your professional assessment, is the RDCS working? Because that would suggest that we have an even higher quality project than what was initially submitted.
So that's an interesting question. So some of the applicants have been coming through the preliminary process, and I would say majority of them, because the preliminary process is not, because it's a public process, the applicants are not showing all their cards on the table when they come in. So they're artificially scoring low. So they're not showing all their commitments. So they may not show all their commitments in the affordable category, or they may not show everything during their project quality. So we're seeing projects come in and score only 111 or 120. We're not seeing them score really high at the preliminary, and they're just coming in just to kind of get a first cut with staff and to find out where they can improve the project. So, I mean, we believe the preliminary process is really valuable, and then we meet with the applicants for about an hour after we score them and go through in detail on where they can improve their score. So it is working.
Okay, thank you.
I have some questions.
I do too, but I'm a little concerned about what we're told. My particular question is about BMR location, which is directly related to the scoring. Right?
What is the question?
What's the question?
The question is there's 20% of the units have 60% of the BMRs. That's not distributed in any relationship to the product type or uniformly across the project. And that stuff was taken out, but it was put into the BMR program and said that we were going to meet that. And this project, to me, clearly doesn't.
So this project is unique. They would prefer to pay the in lieu fee. This project doesn't qualify to pay the in lieu fee. So we have, if you look in the development agreement, we've provided a provision that if in the event that the in lieu fee becomes an option for them, that they would like to pay that. But we also put a provision in the development agreement that they need to comply with the inclusionary ordinance. So even if the exhibits may not show the exact location, the provisions in the development agreement say they have to comply with the inclusionary ordinance, and they will be working with Rebecca within the next 60 days to develop the inclusionary ordinance that requires them enter into an affordable housing agreement. And so that's a separate agreement that will spell out all their requirements that they have to meet for those inclusionary units. That's what the inclusionary ordinance requires today. So everything is not going to be spelled out in the development agreement.
Not worried about the development, I'm worried about what I'm looking at and how it was scored. Because as I understand it, to get the affordable housing units, they got to propose something that's within the realm of our BMR program.
Right, and they have. We've actually worked with them back and forth on this to make sure that they understand what they're committing to, and it's something that our housing department can enforce.
Then how do we end up with 60% of the BMRs and 18% of the units?
So what they've committed to is not exactly what we're going to work out in the agreement. So they're showing it, but yeah, as I said, that's not their preferred alternative. So the agreement will be a separate document. That's what the inclusionary,
How, okay, I'm sorry, maybe I'm dense, because I'm a little tired today. It's been a long day. Now, I don't understand how you can score a project when it doesn't meet the requirements of the program, which is a distributed number of BMRs.
because they don't have to distribute it today. They have to distribute it when they enter into the agreement with the housing department, and they go to the council and they enter into that agreement with the council. So at this stage in the game, they don't have to show every detail of that inclusionary ordinance. This is just RDCS purposes.
But that's an RDCS requirement that they meet that.
So Gina, maybe to help this specific question, but in general, right? You're saying that there's a scoring guide,
Yes.
right? For the RDCS, of which you took this project and you assessed that project. What was submitted to you was assessed against that scoring guide, and based on the criteria of that scoring guide, you're saying they met the criteria.
That's right.
Joe's questioning that, saying, how? How did they meet the criteria? Because you're assessing that based on what you've read, they couldn't have or shouldn't have. Is that what you're saying?
So the narrative and the RDCS manual says that if something is different, if the plans are different and the narrative says one thing, the narrative rules. And so what they've stated in the narrative, that rules, they've made a commitment, and we will verify that as we go through the process and when they come back through and they enter into that agreement with the housing department.
So you're saying their narrative, not your assessment, their actual
Their
written
narrative.
narrative, you're
Yes.
saying that's what's written in that narrative meets the criteria?
Yes.
No?
Well, I don't understand how you would get them relocated. How would that happen?
The applicant would prefer to pay the in lieu fee. So, and with the creation of the inclusionary ordinance, it's created different levels that they have to go through. So you have the RDCS, and they have to propose a certain number of things to get the points for the affordable section. And the distribution is policy, but not in the narrative as far as being distributed. Points don't apply to the distribution, it's only the amount or the voluntary contribution. And they've committed to that, and so they get their points for that. The inclusionary ordinance, which is that second item, if the applicant wants to pay the in lieu fee, they have to get approval from City Council in order to do that. And so what they've done here is say that they want to pay the in lieu fee, but this is the alternative, will provide this number of units. They've noted on their plans where they could end up, but the location of those units and distribution of those units is subject to the affordable housing agreement. And it's all these different levels. So I recognize that in the past, it has been part of the overall narrative, I believe, but in this version of Measure C, it is not. It is, we provide this dollar amount or this number of units, and these are the points that we get.
Boy, this just sounds to me like we've somewhat taken the heart out of this program that has been very successful. And we were told, no, there were other things that were going to hold it to it. And I don't see the other things.
So I think actually we feel that we've actually made it stronger because we actually will have a separate agreement that will enforce all the provisions of the inclusionary ordinance, because the guidelines for all the BMRs are in that inclusionary ordinance, and that we will have a separate document that will detail what has to happen with those units. And we think it's actually going to be stronger, that it's not sitting in this development agreement. It's going to actually be in its own agreement.
Well, all I'm seeing is a cluster of BMRs that are really small, that are sitting in one building instead of being distributed uniformly like we've had for years, and gets them a partial project. And I don't see how you get there from here.
Because for RDCS purposes, it's about the number of units that they're committing to, not where they're sitting. Because the narrative requirement no longer gives points for distribution. It gives points for the number of units or the dollar amount.
But it, as part of that narrative, I believe it says they have to meet the BMR program.
And their narrative commits to that.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see how we get there. I literally don't see how you're going to get there.
But that's not what we're here to determine. They've committed to it, so they have to find a way to get there, or they can't proceed. It's basically what happens next.
But we're awarding, okay, so here's my problem. We're awarding allocations based on something that there's not a clear way to get there.
No, there is a clear way. We're saying we're going to award this number of units with the understanding that we either get these BMRs you've committed to, or you're approved to do an in lieu fee, and you give the city the money.
And if
So
they
either way, they
can't,
meet
if
the
they
commitment.
can't come to an I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
But if they can't come to an agreement with city council on an in lieu fee or where these BMRs would be located, then they're in default on the DA and nothing happens. So this is it's an iterative process. It's not ideal. I will
No
grant you
BMR
that.
cluster is going to be built on the site, essentially, is
It's the way the regulations sit right
way
now.
that.
Oh, but that, we were talked into that. We were pulled out of this. When we tried to put it in here, we were pulled out. And I'm feeling very uncomfortable that we were pulled out and now there's no way to get there.
But there,
But there is a way.
No, hold on, guys, hold on. So it's a bit of a circular discussion here, right? So if I understand the process correctly, they submitted an application, they submitted a narrative, you assess that narrative, and based on that narrative, you're saying you believe they meet the criteria. If I'm correct, that criteria requires them to distribute the BMRs, does it?
no.
It does not.
It requires a certain number of BMRs at a certain income level to be committed to,
Okay,
or the in lieu fee in exchange for those to be
Qualified.
committed to. It doesn't qualify until council says that they'll accept an in lieu fee.
Okay.
And that's at the next step.
okay, all right. So, I'm in the risk of getting back into a circular discussion, I'm not sure what your argument is, Joe, if they're saying the only requirement right now is that they're committing to the BMRs and they met that requirement. So what more could we do at this point?
All I'm saying, and I don't want to be circular about this, right? But the fact is, I thought when we were told it was going to be pulled out and put into the BMR program, that the project as described at us at the scoring level would have to show how it gets there. And this project doesn't come close to meeting that uniform distribution.
But so, okay, hold on. Where is the requirement for uniform distribution?
It's not here.
It's in the BMR program and.
Okay, but this, I mean, we keep going around and
Yeah, yeah.
around. But I mean, I'll read you this as it says, in the case of a conflict between any written project narrative and plans, the narrative shall take precedent over the plans. And they've committed to criteria in the narrative which complies with the RDCS. And they've been scored the 26 points. The housing department has gone over this with the applicant and has agreed to this criteria. The DA has been written to require them to enter into an agreement with housing within 60 days of approval of the DA. We're confident that they will meet the guidelines specified in the inclusionary ordinance.
Okay, let me ask the question in another way then. As we're looking at the thing, would they have to move BMRs to be in compliance with the BMR program?
That would be up to housing to determine.
And should they not be able to do in lieu, that's when that comes into play. So their request, they will go to council and say, can we please pay the in lieu fee? And if council says no, then they will be required to figure out a way to distribute these units that meets the BMR ordinance.
Right.
That housing it's acceptable to our housing division.
Right? So what's wrong with that?
It's about as fluid as it can get. You know, I mean, from having a hard commitment, knowing what we're getting, we got mush.
All right, let's move, then we move on. All right. Any other questions, Joe?
Sorry, I just have a quick
Yeah, please
question,
go ahead.
Gina. So if we're saying that the RDCS process is now, it's been revised to be essentially objective, right?
Correct.
And after submitting this application through the scoring criteria, they score a 164, there's a minimum of 160. Are we just here to verify that 164 is above 160 essentially?
Yes, you're to verify the score based on the objective standards.
Thanks.
Yeah, I got one more question.
So,
I have another question.
please go ahead.
I guess it's sort of twofold. I saw references back to this earlier addendum in CEQA, but in that CEQA it says this is a program level, not a project level. There's
Correct.
no project level CEQA requirement or document on this project?
The project level will be coming forward with the site review and the tentative map that you will be seeing later on down the road. but for RDCS purposes. We're using the CEQA that was previously prepared.
Okay, I think there's some language issues then, somewhere in the resolutions or the development agreement, because it keeps referring to something that we've reviewed that to me isn't project level.
Right, for the RDCS, it still adheres to the program level addendum. This is not a project approval. The granting of allotments does not allow anything to be built, and it doesn't have to be considered as a project per se. The DA that is being approved or recommended for approval, hopefully tonight, if it is for the commitments only, and it grants no project entitlements to the project. It grants allocations for them to continue through the process to achieve entitlements in the future.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you clarify how these points relate to the allocation of the regular points that will be adjusting shortly? In other words, do these get deducted from the points that were allocated by the city council?
So you mean the allotments? So we have
Allotments.
85 allotments that will be in the regular competition. So the downtown allotments, which I'll go back to my slides.
That was my question as well, by the way. Thank you for asking.
So again, I'm going to go back. I might have gone through this too fast. So the downtown allotments, we have 500. That's when we started the whole new Measure S. We started out with 500 for till the end of Measure S. So we haven't touched them. So we have 100 that we can give out in any given year up to the 500. So this is the first project coming through and asking for an allotment or a distribution out of that 500. So we're requesting the 49 for this particular project. So we'll have some additional remaining out of the 100 for this year, but it doesn't touch the 85 that are available for the.
So this is on top of the 85?
Correct.
So how do you meet the criteria of the upper limit of 215?
Well, the 500 are supposed to be freestanding outside of any of the 215. There has been discussion by council where we could see in the future for next year's set of allocations that they could want to apply these to that, but they're supposed to stand free. And that was the whole point of, I believe they were considered under Measure A initially.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Does that, I think, answer my question, which is it doesn't affect the 85, right? This is on top.
Correct.
Okay. And so Gina, on the evaluation, right? First of all, the score of 164. I guess good news being it meets the minimum criteria, minimum score.
Yes.
The not so good news is barely, right? Compared to some other projects, we typically see scoring in the 170s and higher, right? So, but I mean, that's, I guess, the criteria is just meet the minimum score, right?
Right, but this project is also providing a significant public benefit to the city, the new road, the building that they're building for the city. So it's a downtown project. They did score pretty well. But yeah, I mean, it is pretty surprising that they didn't score better, but they are doing considerable public benefit for the city.
Yeah, I get that. This is maybe just a more general question. Is there a specific area that they didn't score in that sort of caused a slightly lower score? I mean, I would expect a downtown project being so visible that actually would score a little higher, actually.
Yeah,
I
actually.
know it's not required to. It's just required to meet the 160, right?
Right, they're only required to meet the 160, but because our criteria is geared toward the single-family dwelling in the project quality, even though we're now more towards the objective criteria, it still has a hard time scoring because it is a multifamily project.
And then and this is a mixed use, right? This is designated mixed use, and I see there's a unit 41 here, vertical mixed use building. I tried to find this in the notes here. I was struggling to find it. So what is the criteria for mixed use here, and how did you assess that it met that criteria, and you know, is there some minimum amount of mixed use is supposed to be, or is that not defined?
No, so I'm not sure what criteria you're looking at. So
Well,
there were some criteria that they were able to get points for, and some that they weren't, so I would have to look at the specific
Talking about
criteria.
housing types, but
But this is a mixed-use zone, right? This is supposed to be mixed use, right? Which means a combination of residential and non-residential, correct?
yeah.
Okay.
And it's got an office building, and it's got vertical mixed use on it with stacked flats.
There is no specific square footage
That's my question.
requirements that defines mixed use.
You just have to have mixed use. It doesn't say how much.
Correct.
But I had problems with that particular scoring criteria too, but I think it's not achieving what I thought it was gonna achieve from the looks of this project, so
It's like-
that's beyond this project scope. We need to go look at it, but.
Yeah. Again, it meets the criteria. I read it and look at it and kind of go, yeah, we got mixed use barely, right, again, and it's primarily a residential development,
So
right?
this project was able to qualify with 3 different housing types, and so we actually worked with the applicant to go back and forth on what housing types this project met. So they did get the points that they needed here.
Okay,
Right.
right.
I'm just gonna say, I think that needs, that particular scoring criteria we need to look at, because the way the project turned out, and I understand how it got the scoring, I don't think it's getting what we wanted to have happen. Right? So I think I just wanna leave it at that and
Yeah.
say it's a bigger conversation.
Okay, it is. Okay, Gina, I think we're good. I think we'll open for public,
Quick question.
is this for Gina?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So first of all, thank you for all the comments made by the planning commissioners, because most of my questions were already answered. One question I did have was about the private open space. I was trying to find that 25% private open space, and it wasn't too clear for me. Can you please help me find it and show me how that open private space is?
We have like open space through here. There's not a lot of open space.
What's the requirement? 25%?
I think so, yeah, that's what it says.
That's 25% above, or?
Above the zoning district requirements.
Oh, 25% above the zoning district requirement.
Yeah, so there's not that much here.
But on the narrative summary, they talked about 30% of the area being open space or landscaping, which I couldn't figure out how they got to that.
Probably the
There's a
street frontage.
landscape plan attached to your plan, and you could open that up. I don't actually have an exhibit of that up.
So maybe we could ask the question a different way, Gina, is for the purposes of scoring, what is the requirement for open space, and what was your assessment of that?
Go here. So is there a particular one that you're looking at? Because they actually were able to get points.
So I think one of the ones I was looking at was on packet page 105. And that is, where'd it go? Open space design and outdoor amenities, I think it is.
'Cause they were able to get points for shade trellises and for barbecue and picnic areas, and so they were able to get 8 points for that.
Gina, I believe he's looking at 10B, number 2, the private open space. Usable private open
Right.
space for ground floor units are provided for all townhomes at least 25% above zoning district requirements.
Right, yeah, it's 10B.
So in the parks and open space, is that where you're looking?
Yeah, it's on
Yeah.
packet page
10B.
105.
Okay. So they were able to get courtyards visible from living spaces, that's 2 points. And then they were able to get them for usable private open ground floor units. And so Tony actually went through this with them and gave them the 3 points for private open space. And so he looked at the townhomes and what they were proposing for just the townhomes and was able to give them the points for that.
Okay. I'm still not 100% sure what you mean by that.
So we can actually ask the applicant
Okay.
to explain that,
Okay.
because I know that we went back and forth
Okay.
with Tony, and he's not here, and went through that whole exercise.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Gina. I think we're good.
Okay.
All right, let's open up for public comment.
Paul Watala.
Good evening, Commissioners. Paul Atala, the applicant, also a Morgan Hill resident. We've been working closely with staff over the last year to get to this point. And I understand some of the frustration. I think us being the first downtown project in the new Measure C, requiring new things like us even having to score a minimum of 160 or having to include BMRs has created some bumps and stuff that even we were figuring out as we go. I think staff's done a good job of getting us to this point. I think they've created a good report, and I think the bulk of your questions will be answered by them or either my project civil engineer. But we are here to answer anything that you have for us.
So you can defer your question if you want to your team here, but yeah, where is the open space? Do you want to defer to somebody else to answer
Yeah,
the
I
question?
think
or-
John would
And
be
please, John,
much
you can
better
come
at
up.
that.
Please come up also.
Gina, can we
John,
pull
let
up
me
the little area map as well, just for visual reference while they speak? Is that okay?
So this is in relation to not so much the shared common area, but it's the private open space attached to the buildings themselves. So it's 25% greater than the minimum code requirements for, say, a deck or a balcony on the first floor. So for instance, code requires a 5x6 deck. Then what we're providing in the project would be 25% greater than that. So that's the question. It's not so much the common open space that's maintained by the HOA, but the decks and the porch space.
And John, where's the common open space?
The common open spaces, there's one by each tree that we're preserving, the mixed-use building, and then the two buildings in the center of the project.
Can you please show us?
So there are two dark green circles on the map.
Yeah, and just for reference, the
Yeah.
private open space is marked as 5-J5, and it's all the little green spaces on the townhomes. They all have that label, and it references back to the table for private open space 3 points and the explanations next to it on the site development plan.
So the public open space is that center point there where that it says existing three to remain and some area in front of that?
No, I'm referring to only the private decks, private patios. That's what this point is speaking to.
Okay.
Okay.
And then what about the shared open space? Can you talk on that, please?
Sure, it's hard to describe on something this small, but there's really, if you look at the constraints of the site, it lends itself to only two places where you can really have significant, meaningful open spaces, one here and one there. In preserving the trees, you can only do so much around the tree structure, or the root structure, to keep it healthy. So what we're doing is we're providing arbors, sitting areas around the central area, and then the more active recreation around the mixed-use building farther away from the oak tree. Barbecue pits, arbors, rain garden, aesthetics.
So if you open the landscape exhibit that was sent to you and you look at MS-04, then you'll see all the open space and the labels for everything.
What page in the packet? Or is it in, yeah, how far down in project drawings is it?
Did you say MS04?
MS-04, correct?
304.
I don't have the
I don't have an MS-04.
Yeah, I have it here. It's on page. My page number is not displaying for some reason.
If I understand the
Page
question
71,
correctly,
Joe?
it's about the 25% greater than code?
No,
Is
we're
that what we're
asking,
discussing, or something else now?
no, we're on the second question. Where is the open space? That was the question, which you showed us, I believe, right? The two circles there?
That's right.
Okay.
Is this above or after the floor plans or before?
Right. No, it's in the beginning of the package. It's before the architecture. So there's not a lot of vignette detail with this package. You'll see that when the Arkansas site comes forward.
So it's packet page 71.
Yeah, I see it. Okay. All right, thank you.
So one of my questions related to that is, let me see if I can get it. If I, 1, 2, 3, between the third and fourth building from the left, right there where you have that first black circle, John? A lot of those have basins written in front of them, especially the building on the right. What's those basin depths? Do you have any idea at this point?
What's the basin depth?
Yeah.
It's between 1 and 2 feet, really. And right now, what we've done subsequent to this application is do further engineering, and we're including basins towards the rear of the site, toward the tracks, and subterranean structures in front of the units. So you're thinking they're going to have, some areas in front of the units where you can't actually go out and use it?
Yeah, that was my fear when I
Right,
saw the
no,
basins.
No, you'll see the Arkansas site, and all the engineering in the Arkansas site is going to show you all the subterranean structures. So we're not going to have huge basins everywhere.
Okay. Okay, so you've sort of evolved from this point, because some of the basins I've seen are not 1 and 2 feet deep.
No, there's some
they're
large
much
ones.
deeper than
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
and that worried me, because they're sitting right in front of
No.
all these units.
No, on tight sites like this, you really can't have larger basins.
Just, all I'm looking is something I couldn't find very much detail, so, okay.
Okay, other questions? Okay, thank you. Any other speakers?
Rocky Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Rocky Garcia. As many of you know, we have a property downtown called SunSuite, which is an 83-unit apartment project. And we also have gone through, I think, every competition since the original Measure E. No, I'm sorry, I missed one during that time. So we've been a long-time developer here. I'm here in super support of this project for Mr. Latala. We need housing downtown. This is for sale housing. Our particular housing is rental housing. It creates a vibe downtown, and will continue to create our downtown and to be vibrant and to be something, a place where people want to come. I understand some commissioners questioning on the BMRs and things like that. We're having the same problems in the two projects that we're working on as we speak. So it's almost like I think we need to have a meeting with not only staff, but you and the developers to iron out some of these BMR programs. The commitment that many of us have made is we are committed to building those units as best we can. All of our 83 units, or at least 90% of them, will be considered under the state RENA housing numbers as below market or low-income units. So we do have the number of, quote, BMRs downtown, just from our project alone. Again, I'm in full support of Paul's project here. Hale Lumber has been there for a long, long time, and bringing new housing in is a real plus. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
There are no more speakers.
Anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay, I'll close the public comment. Back to the commissioners for discussion. Anybody like to start? I have some comments, but I'll keep mine to the end. All right, then I'll keep mine to the beginning. All right. So I guess this is a little different. You know, it's downtown, and it's something a little new for me. New enough that it's actually making me a little uncomfortable. I like the fact that this site is being developed. I know we've been trying to do it for many years. My reaction, reading and listening, a couple of things. One is that I'm a little concerned that even though I know it meets the criteria 164, but just about, and it's difficult maybe for projects like this to score much higher. My biggest concern would be, we're talking about how many units here? 49? 49 units, which I would assume by the size and pricing and location will have a lot of children and families and so on, right? There's no space here, no space.
There's a park next door.
No, within the unit itself, within the development itself. And maybe that's the nature of downtown. I know these projects are meeting the criteria, but these places have to be livable too, and I struggle. We got places to park cars, and we got driveways, but very, very little green space. That bothers me, and I know that maybe little we can do about it because it meets the criteria. I get it, but that would be my feedback. And not only here, but to council too, and say, if we're going to develop like this downtown, we got to find some ways to give a bit more space, especially for children to play. You know, you're talking about a very busy avenue in East Dunn. You're talking about a park, or the CRC, or the community center across the way, and Depot Street, all very busy. And that would be my major concern. Other than that, I like the concept, I like the housing styles, I like the mix, I like the fact that there's some vertical mixed use there. I like all that. That would be my main gripe. And I'm not sure is there much we can do about that, but that would be my feedback.
I guess kind of on the heels of your comment about the score, I would be curious to know kind of how the scoring bias, you said there's kind of a scoring bias towards single-family homes that they tend to score higher in the process. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, it's not a bias, it's just how Measure S and the criteria was developed when, you know, we had the 20 workshops and the criteria was developed, and it's still heavily weighted towards the single-family dwelling, and so the scoring criteria, there's not as many points available to multifamily townhouse developments.
So do we know what the impact is basically to this? So in other words, if this were a single family development, how much higher would this score be?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head at this point, but I mean, when we go back and look at the criteria after this competition, we could tell you then.
Again, just out of curiosity, I understand the chairman's point about the just enough on the score, but given the fact that you mentioned that, I wouldn't want to, you know, I guess we're not penalizing, but come down too heavily on the score because of it.
No, and they've received all the points they could possibly get.
Okay, so that's kind of more towards what I was going.
The project quality, they received all the points they could get.
Okay, so in spite of the score, they were aiming pretty high as far as what they could have. Okay.
Yes.
So I would like to add that with our exempt projects, whether they're exempt due to downtown set-asides, affordable housing, or whatever else may come up as far as exempt projects, they're only required to score 160. Higher is great. It means that there's more that it can get, or it's provided more commitments, but 160 is the requirement. In the competition, it's the minimum, but 160 is the requirement to score. And so as we get more of those, this is just the first one, but as we get more of those, you're probably going to see, especially in the affordables, them coming in right at 160, 161, 162. So just something to note.
You mean in 100% affordable?
Oh.
I get that. This is not that, right?
Correct.
But by the same token, that's something we should look at when we look at the scoring criteria
Absolutely.
again, and make sure that if they're gonna come in at 160, we get everything we want.
Well, I think when we redo the manual, what Gina was just saying is focusing on not only the single family, but looking at mixed use and multifamily as well. That's really important because the history of the manual has skewed towards single family because that's primarily what's been built. And looking at how those points would work for multifamily may be the next set of workshops as we're developing the new manual next year, or actually in the spring.
But
One of the things that we thought were gonna be for multifamily in downtown, the single-family projects farther out went after those points.
Correct.
So we need to, there's some work that needs to be done there.
but by definition, a score of 160 doesn't get us everything we want, right? It gets us 80% of what we want, right?
No.
No.
I mean, it's a
No.
score of 80%.
No, nobody scored 200.
Yeah. Nobody else
So then
scored.
what's the point of having,
Well-
if it's unattainable, what's the
Okay,
point?
but it's off topic a little bit, but we really need to sit back and look at the context of the new state law and how many units are be going outside the competition. And we're gonna have to look at the scoring criteria in such a way that we get more for the minimum. And there's ways to do that, but that's way beyond what this
Yeah,
discussion
it
is.
is beyond this discussion, but your point about what's the point in having to 200? Technically, you could score 200, right?
Technically.
Yeah.
I would like to say,
Unlikely, but
too, that this particular project is putting forward more public benefit per unit than we've seen in a lot of public projects, from the road realignment to the construction of a mixed-use building. Those are significant public improvements or public benefits that we have not seen in many projects of late. So just wanted to throw that out there. It's not relevant to what, well, it is relevant to a certain point because it's part of the overall narrative.
Okay. Other comments, questions?
I'll make a motion to approve the awarding of the allocations.
Second.
Motion, second. Comments? Okay, we have motion and second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. How many of us are here? 5? 5. Okay.
All right,
In the
so
second, yeah, go ahead.
the development agreement resolution, I think there needs some changes. One of the sections that makes me nervous is maybe just the wording, but it says, the project is subject to CEQA and an initial study has been prepared and addendum has been prepared for the project. To me, that sort of reads like there's a project level and it's not there. How do we, maybe it's the wording.
Which section are you
Yeah,
looking
it's section 6 of the resolution.
Which page?
It's packet page 17.
I can see where you're coming from on that. The project in this case is the DA. So I'm not sure if our city attorney would like to suggest language.
Which paragraph is it that you?
Section 6.
Section 6, 2B of the, page 2B of the resolution, packet page 17.
So instead of saying for the project, we could say the development agreement. Would that make you feel more comfortable?
It would. It would, because when you read the document, the land exchange addendum, it really says very specifically, this is not a project level review, but I just wanted to clarify that. And then, I think it's in the exhibits to the development agreement. Hang on, I'll get to it. Exhibit B in particular, if I recall, right?
Oh, you're doing a lot of scrolling there.
Yeah, well, that's because, yeah, Exhibit B. On page, let's see, page 42, it talks about 40 townhome style condominiums. I believe that number needs to be 49, or 40 townhome plus 9 units. Maybe it reads that way. I didn't see the second number. Maybe it reads, okay.
It says
it's okay.
40 townhomes and 9 residential.
It's okay, I misread it, sorry.
So, do we need to reopen that vote, or just
No,
make
no.
a note of that change, the word project to
We
development?
haven't made that vote
We haven't made
yet.
that motion yet. Second one. Yep.
I think that's it. With the change to section 6 of the resolution to read the development agreement as opposed to the project, I'll make a motion to approve
Got that, Jim?
the development agreement.
Second.
All right, motion second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No opposed. 5-0. Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes this item. Yeah. All right, thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute break. Students, if you'd like your signatures, come on up to the dais here and we'll sign the papers for you. We'll have you take the Everybody ready? Mr. Beatty, are you ready? All right, we're going on to agenda item number... Three.
Sorry to jump in there.
This is block 1.
You ready for me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. John Beatty, Principal Planner with Development Services. This is a city-initiated zoning amendment for approximately 8.55 acres of property located on the northeast corner of Monterey Road and Burnett Avenue from the Planned Unit Development, PUD, and Service Commercial, CS, zoning districts to the mixed-use flex plan development combining district to establish a block-level master plan for Monterey Road Corridor Block 1. This map shows Block 1 in the context of the general plan designations that surround it. Block 1, all of Block 1 is designated mixed-use flex, and you can see some of the designations that surround the property and across Monterey Road, most of which, all of which are residential in nature, except for across Burnett, which is also mixed-use flex. I mentioned at our study session that I would provide some background. This maybe is just a reminder for the Planning Commission, but certainly maybe more for our audience members that might not be as familiar with why we're doing or proposing what we're proposing. Subsequent to the adoption of the Morgan Hill 2035 General Plan in July 2016, which established the requirement for a block-level master plan or plans before residential or mixed-use projects could happen on mixed-use flex designated properties along the corridor, the block-level master plan process was initiated initially with the help of the team from Lisa Wise Consulting. Later in October of 2018, we presented the findings and recommendations from our commercial consultant to the City Council and Planning Commission at a study session. That might have been 2 study sessions, now that I think about it. And given the robustness of that discussion and the amount of additional work that still needed to be completed and discussed, staff determined that we weren't going to finish the comprehensive block-level master plan for the entirety of the corridor prior to the RDCS competition, as was initially recommended by Planning Commission and then ultimately directed by City Council. So at Council's request, staff returned in November of last year with several block-level master plan alternatives that could potentially allow Monterey Corridor applicants the ability to participate in the 2018-19 RDCS competition. At the December 5th meeting, the City Council agreed that the process for developing a block-level master plan should not be driven by the goal of allowing particular projects to participate in the 2018-2019 RDCS, but did acknowledge that we have 2 Monterey Corridor projects that have submitted their mandatory RDCS prelims for their proposals. And then at a discussion with the council on December 19th, the council directed that we should draft zoning amendments to establish block-level master plans for blocks 1 and 4 and resume working with Lisa Wise Consultants on the preparation of a comprehensive block-level master plan, or at least figure out what that should look like for the remainder of the mixed-use flex designated portions of the Monterey Corridor. So tonight, staff is recommending that the Commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council consider the use of the addendum to the Morgan Hill 2035 EIR in accordance with CEQA, and approve a zoning amendment from the Planned Unit Development and CS Service Commercial Zoning Districts to the Mixed-Use Flex Plan Development Combining District to establish a block-level master plan for Monterey Road Corridor Block 1, and we'll get into some of the details of that. The block-level master plan, the PD, would establish the basic expectations and some specific requirements for the future development of Block 1 through the use of a map such as the one displayed on your screen. This is Exhibit A from the draft ordinance. It shows the major project. It shows the overall boundary of the block, and it shows some of the major project components, the different land use elements, and some specific details at a high level. The ordinance also includes Exhibit B, which in text form describes the land use regulations, guidelines, et cetera, that are applicable to Block 1. So, didn't mean to go over that so fast. The land use regulations would be things like permitted uses, development standards, other types of specifications. And Exhibit B also describes the subsequent processes that would be involved and required before development could happen on these sites. For Block 1, which is located at the northernmost end of the Monterey Corridor, adjacent to the City of San Jose Greenbelt, the following list of specific guidance is included in Exhibit B as requirements for development of the block. When we had our study session, a couple of Planning Commission members mentioned some other topics that they felt should be included, and we could come back and decide if those are those want to be part of the Planning Commission's recommendation. One suggestion was related to the depth of retail that's currently specified in the ordinance as 35-foot minimum, with a comment that that's potentially too shallow to accommodate a wide range of retail uses or non-residential uses. Another comment was related to the location of this block, in particular the northernmost part of the block, being a potential place that could somehow reflect, by incorporating potential features into the design of the block, to reflect that this is a northern gateway into the city. We didn't get into specifics about how that could be accomplished, but that's the kind of high-level guidance that could be reflected in Exhibit B, and then further refined as the project goes through the preliminary plan process, and then the PD master plan, which we'll get into in a second here. In terms of the steps involved in the block level master planning process and subsequent PD master plan process, as we discussed during the study session, if a block level master plan is approved by City Council for Block 1, that would allow an applicant that is proposing residential units to compete in the RDCS, whether that's this RDCS or a subsequent one. They would be allowed to compete in the RDCS. Subsequent to block level master plan approval, a Block 1 applicant would file a preliminary plan review in support of their proposal for a specific PD master plan, and the Planning Commission and City Council would have an opportunity to review and comment on that prelim in terms of its consistency with the approved block level master plan. So if the preliminary plan is found consistent with the block level master plan, the applicant would then be allowed to continue in the RDCS competition. And then down the road, assuming the applicant was lucky enough to be awarded RDCS allotments, they would submit a zoning amendment for their project-specific PD master plan, and that PD master plan would, like other zoning amendments, be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and City Council would have the ultimate decision on that. This is an excerpt from a longer, more detailed schedule in your packet illustrating how the proposed block level master plan PD and PD master plan process could progress in parallel with the current RDCS schedule. And just as a reminder, since the City Council emphasized this during their discussions on multiple occasions, the two applicants with projects in Block 1 and Block 4, which is the next item, are aware of and understand the risks in pursuing an RDCS application for allotments without knowing if this very thing that we're working on, that we're asking you to make a recommendation on tonight, this block level master plan will even be approved for their block. And even if approved, if it's going to be approved in such a way that works for what they want to do. Subsequent to the adoption of the block level master plan, the Commission and City Council would again have the opportunity to review a prelim. As you can see with the timelines that we have on this tentative schedule, as soon as right after the City Council has their hearing to evaluate these, the Planning Commission's recommendation on these two zoning amendments for these block level master plans, the applicants would be required to submit their prelims for their PD master plans. And in March and then in April, that's when we have tentatively scheduled Planning Commission to review those prelims and City Council subsequently in April. If the prelim is found consistent, again, they can continue on with the RDCS. If the prelim is found to be inconsistent, like other processes, they have the ability to appeal that determination. It would be a quick turnaround between when City Council, should they make that determination of inconsistency, and when the applicant would need to decide to file that appeal. But if they do, that appeal hearing would be in May, and if that decision of non-consistency is upheld at that appeal hearing, well, that's the end of their RDCS competition. They would have to try again the next year, if you will. But if it's overturned, then they would obviously be able to continue on. So as is the case with all zoning amendments, certain findings need to be made in order for the city to approve them. In this case, and those findings are the same ones that you're probably familiar with, listed on the screen. In this case, the proposed amendment to establish the block level master plan is consistent with the underlying mixed-use flex general plan land use designation, in that the PD incorporates the allowed uses and builds upon the development standards of the conventional mixed-use flex zoning district. And to help achieve the general plan vision of transforming Block 1 into part of a walkable and bike-friendly mixed-use corridor, the block level master plan provides additional land use regulations consistent with the general plan urban form policies by highlighting the requirements for things such as density feathering, building placement, design, provision of public gathering places, etc. And to that end, the proposed amendment will not be detrimental to public interest, health, safety, or general welfare, and does not result in an internal inconsistency with other zoning code provisions. So again, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution with a recommendation to consider the addendum in accordance with CEQA and approve a zoning amendment from PUD and CS zoning districts to the mixed-use flex PD combining district to establish a block level master plan for the Monterey Road corridor, Block 1. I believe that's it. I'd be happy to take any questions or to continue our discussion from the study session on some of the bigger ticket items that we should be thinking about and including in our Exhibit B, maybe building on this list of items that we have bulleted here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, commissioners, questions for John? Joe, please go ahead.
First one, John, go back to those reported actions. You made reference to an addendum. aren't we just using the zoning code addendum?
That's correct. It's the use of the addendum. Thank you for pointing that out, clarifying that. Yep.
Then on Exhibit B, 1A,
And if it helps the commission, we could actually bring up the Exhibit A. It was too much to include on this slide, so I just included the outline. But if we want to bring up the actual Exhibit B to look at the exact text, I know we had some discussion in the study session that could help with, and maybe that,
right.
if that's the pleasure of the commission, we could do that.
One I'm questioning is in permitted uses, it says specific uses allowed for Block 1 are further described on Exhibit A below, or Exhibit A and below. And I don't know what Exhibit A is.
Exhibit A is this diagrammatic map that shows these bigger features. And so let me make sure that was included in the tab. Yep, it was. So Exhibit A is this exhibit, or it could be something else that illustrates what we tried to describe in text. Some things are better illustrated like this in map form, while other things make more sense in text, or both, or vice versa.
So if that's the Exhibit A you're referencing there, I guess I didn't read it that way. I read it as there was something that was talking about specific uses, because it says more specific use detail, right? Or it says specific uses allowed for Block 1 are further described on Exhibit A. If Exhibit A is just, I don't know.
Right, so Exhibit A is fairly diagrammatic and general, but it does say, for example, maybe I can make this a little bit smaller so we can see the legend.
Yeah.
Exhibit A, for example, shows this orange-ish area, and that area would, generally speaking, allow residential or commercial uses, while this purple area at the corner of Burnett and Monterey would allow commercial or mixed use. So someone couldn't just do residential here, but in this portion of the property to the north, they could do residential or commercial or some combination of the two.
Okay, just so that I'm just clearing the record. Excuse me if I'm detailed, just because I'm a little tired. Exhibit that A, is that demarcation line or property line?
Which line? The red?
Between the purple and the yellow.
It just happens to be the assessor's parcel line, and that's most likely also the property line, just to be absolutely clear.
So John, when you go down through that other document, when you get into the details of Exhibit B, I read all of this here. I read it, I get it. Is there anything special in here? Is there anything unique in here? Is there anything that you want to point out that's different than the norm per se, or is this all fairly normal stuff for the zone that you're proposing?
Well, I'd say one thing that is slightly different is that we're highlighting this this concept, or this, I shouldn't say just concept, but the idea and policy of density feathering. That policy exists in our general plan today in multiple places, but it's not really described as to how one achieves density feathering. So I thought it would be important for us to introduce not only the policy, that concept, thing I call a concept, but to introduce some idea for how one would go about trying to achieve that by adding the second sentence. So that's a little bit different. If you're referring to the city's use of old shell PUDs, this provides much more guidance than a lot of what the city has done in the past. A lot of the shell PUDs that exist all over the city still exist today and still are in effect. really don't provide much guidance other than sometimes saying, well, you've got to figure out shared access and parking. Sometimes they don't even say that. It's just implied that those kinds of things need to be figured out through the subsequent zoning amendment process that provides the what was called a precise plan, but has become the PD master plan. That's where you see the specific details of a proposal and how it is consistent with kind of in this case, the block level master plan and the general plan and other zoning code requirements. So is this unique? It's unique maybe in that it tries to put some of the more important aspects of what guides development on a project site in an easy to access spot.
Yeah, so a couple of specific questions, right? So, for example, if you go to packet page 181, section D, right? I think you're right there somewhere. You might have just gone past it, maybe. Scroll up a bit, John. Yeah. Like these type of requirements, for example, if you look at, I expect what's going to happen here. This is the lot where you already have the established commercial section, right? Which is where Josephine's is and that area, right? And then you've got primarily potential residential development around that, right? So, for example, it says primary entrances for new buildings should be oriented towards the street, right? Parking should be behind buildings. I'm just thinking with specific requirements like that, could that be a disadvantage rather than an advantage to the design and layout of something livable where you force everything to face the street and force everything to have parking at the rear? I'm just curious as to...
I mean, theoretically, I think because these are general specifications and it says that the specific wording of the language is that primary entrances for new buildings should be oriented toward the street, that's a general best practice, but if there's a legitimate reason why that shouldn't be the case with a particular project, it's that kind of back and forth that would happen with the review of their specific proposal. And so, like other general plan policies or other things that are worded in such a way, this requires them to make an effort to try to accomplish this kind of building form orientation. But if there's a legitimate reason why their project should deviate, they need to argue that, and we need to be convinced that that is the case. Does that make sense? That's actually a really good point. A lot of what we have in terms of urban design principles and standards and policies in the general plan are translated in various ways in the documents that we have, the zoning code and the RDCS competition manual. So the RDCS competition manual has a lot in it that reflect the basic principles of good urban design that are in the general plan and other places, our design manual. But you know, those are for scoring points. If there's a good reason for them to not do something, well, they might not be able to score the point, but it might make for a better project for some reason. So maybe they could score points some other way.
Okay.
But thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point.
Then where would we, so we made some references earlier about this specific block is a gateway at the end of the day. This is one of the first entry points to the city from the north, right? We also made a reference, John, somewhere along the way around walkable, bikeable, bike-friendly, walk-friendly. Where do we incorporate those requirements in here? So, for example, if we wanted to insert something relative to, because this specific block is a gateway, and we wanted some sort of a gateway feature, I mean, could we or should we include that here, or is that getting too detailed?
Sorry, before we jump in there, I know we keep using the term gateway, but my understanding is that we have specific identified what we're calling gateways in Morgan Hill, but you're talking about the actual geographical
Yes,
point
I'm talking
where the
about,
city limits start.
maybe I'm not using the right term, but it's like this is your first.
It really is the entrance to Morgan Hill in the north end, but when I'm thinking gateways, I'm thinking, we've identified, was it Cochrane and Monterey is one of them, right? Dunn in Monterey, I believe, is another one. So I'm just going to specific sites, so I just wanted to make sure that we're not talking about adding a specific, like delineating it, a gateway itself.
No,
Okay.
I'm maybe not to confuse terms if there was another term to use, but you know what I mean, right? It's the entrance point to the city, and it's people's first impressions to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
After they get past all the couches on Monterey and the way they get past those, then yeah.
Leaving San Jose, yay! Entering Morgan Hill, yay! Is there something that we could add? For sure, we could add it. I don't know exactly what that language would look like or how that would read. If that's important enough to introduce as a concept, we could do it. And if it turns out that we could leave it vague enough so that at the PD master planning process, we could decide if it's just not reasonable to require that kind of gateway feature. I don't think we have a good idea of what that might be. This is also maybe on the wrong side of the street, on the wrong side of a busy Monterey road.
I would like to see something that recognizes the fact that this is a gateway, but it's more reflected maybe in the building design or the architecture as opposed to a feature. Right? So it's back to like we had on that other application down at Monterey and Cochrane, right? It's in the buildings and it's in that as opposed to putting some sort of sign there.
Yeah,
right?
it wasn't just a sign, but I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
that's
I'm just saying recognizing the fact that it is an entry point.
Right.
Right? And
Right.
because this is at the end of the day, it's about a specific block,
Yeah.
right? And this specific block has some uniquenesses, and one of the uniquenesses is that it's the entry point, so your first entry point to the city.
It's really more of an exit point to John's comment, right? Because it's on the northbound side of Monterey.
But if you come down, if you turn your head like this,
if we're
you're
being
driving-
strict, yeah, you come in southbound, you see it. But I also, again, going back to if you mind me beating a dead horse a little bit, 3 blocks down from this point, there are 2 identified gateways, kind of, right? And if you really think about the water tower, the Cochrane-Monterey intersection with the specific feature that we have, as well as the train bridge, which itself could be almost considered a gateway because it really does frame your entrance into Morgan Hill. That's going to be like 4 gateways on your way into town coming from San Jose. So...
We do have a lot of them. I'd just like to add, I recognize the desire of what you're looking to see in this area. I just want to note that there are several general plan policies that apply to gateways and visual enhancements of those gateways. And this PD does not preclude any application from being consistent with the general plan. So those policies would still need to be met, even if they're not explicitly restated in the zoning.
Okay.
But again, if it's one of those things that's important enough for us to daylight here, just to really drive home the importance of that, then we can do it. We do whatever.
I would add that, in my opinion, I think it actually is very important enough for it to be added into there. I think the general plan states somewhere how there should be some type of sense of arrival into Morgan Hill. And I think that's like a crucial point that's different than all other gateways, is that is like one of the most major areas of arrival into Morgan Hill. There are, other gateway features in certain like corners and things that kind of make the 2 corners kind of come together, or say, for example, off of Cochrane and Monterey. But I think this is especially unique in that sense that we have that opportunity to, make that statement for people arriving or even for people leaving. and I think that it's an opportunity that we should take, more seriously.
You got the input? Think about it.
I do, and then if the commission wants to translate that into part of the, a recommendation to include that, I think maybe we should keep track of some of these things that we're talking about.
So, I mean, if I had, suggestions, I mean, there could be like some type of identifying features, some type of arcs that go across, Monterey to both sides, or, there's so many different ways of doing it. I think, but the fact that for this specifically, you want just some type of bigger picture item, I don't want to make it too restricting, because, you want to kind of keep it open to like the flexibility, the creativity, the innovation that might kind of come up. So I'm kind of hesitant to give specifics. I don't know if that's the same with the other commissioners, but for me, by just talking about it, I don't know if it gives that sense of what we think would be that sense of arrival into Morgan Hill. But yeah, that's what I think of it. And I don't even know if it's possible to have some type of arc that goes all the way across or something that says "Welcome to Morgan Hill" or whatnot.
I like it.
I can see that as being pretty challenging.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I think
ownership of the landing spot on the other side of Monterey, given the railroad right-of-way and potential high-speed rail.
Yeah, and that's why I'm cognizant of that.
But
so,
maybe there's something else.
I brought up the topic, so I wasn't being that ambitious about putting an arc or anything like that. I was saying something to the language of recognizing this specific block is in a location which is an entry point, right? And whether that's through being more conscious of architectural design, something to reflect that. I mean, that's a bit ambitious, but an arc over the Monterey. But I get your point, right? You're saying something there. So whatever we could do language-wise to at least recognize that, right? But I would say also, John, not so restricted that it's so specific. Something that just says, think about this as you're getting into the detail of it, right?
I think we have enough of an idea that we could pass along, if that is the will of the commission, to pass that along. I guess we could always look to the project to the west and say that that's not providing that gateway architecture, that gateway feature that says that this is the entrance to Morgan Hill, and it needs to be something not that.
It should be, exactly.
In fairness, they have a railway, though, buffering them from the road,
Yeah,
right?
it's tough. Yeah, that was a tough interface.
Right. I mean, I'm not excusing the existing.
Let's keep moving. So other inputs?
It's mostly a question. So I was trying to understand the open space buffer that runs along Monterey and what the purpose of that would be.
Well, it was in part to, one, to address some of the density feathering, but also to replicate some of what is going on or had been applied to the project across Monterey. So it has, sorry, that's messy. It has a large open space buffer, largest setback from its northern boundary and from the railroad right away.
Well, if I remember the history of that project, right, other than the rezoning, the green space up in that north corner, John, was really meant to match across the Monterey.
Here?
Right, because that's in the open space area for San Jose there, right? There is a jog.
This is all Coyote Greenbelt.
Right. The buffer more to the south of that line you just drew. Okay, so see, it looks like green right there inside your arc on the left. Right there, that green, that's the buffer area. The one down along the railroad tracks, I believe they had to separate out to get the noise compliance. Right in there, they had to put some distance between themselves so that they could get the noise down. But
maybe. I mean, there's no wall there, right? There's a short wall.
There's a short wall.
Whether that accomplishes anything or not.
Well, the wall wasn't what was doing it. They tried to do it with building materials and sound and that, but they couldn't do it. They had to have a distance between them, right, as I recall, but.
So I guess a question is any of that important here?
Right, and I'm not sure it is down that far. I would rather put the green space, if we're gonna do it, up on the north boundary, up there, yeah. Right?
Really? Wouldn't you like your green space to be usable? Within the
It
development
doesn't
zone?
say it isn't usable up there. All I'm saying is,
On one side.
yeah.
Okay.
If you're using it as a buffer, that's where the buffer is, as opposed to across from.
I'm not so worried about the buffer as I am, we talk about livability and bikeability and walkability and it's like, I'd rather see green space very usable. Anyway, so is there a specific recommendation here then, or?
I was just commenting on
Okay.
how it was done, as I recall.
Mr. Chair, are we going to open the public hearing
Yep.
before we, make any recommendations?
Yes,
Okay.
we have to.
We'll finish this discussion first, and then we'll open the public hearing. Okay, any other questions for John? Okay, John, thank you. Let's open the public hearing. We have at least one speaker, Mr. Oliver. Do we have other cards as well? We do? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Dick Oliver, representing the property, and the owner is in the audience today. Just historically, just let you know that we've been working over 2 years, probably over 4 years, to do a Measure C or a Measure S application on this property. And the council has been supportive of trying to get this done so we could be competing in this year. They gave us a temporarily okay, and so we have submitted preliminary applications. The council at the last meeting said they appreciated that and would like to see us be able to further compete. And so I'm here to support the staff's opinion today that we should be able to do it with the guidance given under Exhibit B, which you've seen. I just had a couple of comments to make in that regard. Looking at the gateway to the city, this is the gateway to the city on the west side, and this is the gateway on the east side. So we have two different gateways really to the city, and they're substantially farther apart. Up here is one, and down here is the other. We think that the buffering, this is area is the green belt. It's an area that's, I think, dedicated or given to the city by the Berg family when they gave the high school site. Oh, the Sabrato family. And I'm not sure we need to buffer a buffer. The concept of buffering has usually been for agricultural purposes. And so the green belt itself is the buffer, and I'm not sure we need to buffer the buffer. We can look at the feathering and the example of the across the street, because I think, as Mr. Downey has indicated, the open space I would much rather use and would try to use so it's usable for the project residents. What we're trying to do in this project is make something that solves all the problems that you elicited in your earlier discussion this evening. Trying to have open space, places for the children. When we talk about having opening or doors or front doors that face Monterey, that is probably a given because of the other provisions in the general plan and into the zoning, and also to avoid Yvonne's major issue of having a wall along Monterey Road. And so to avoid putting the wall along Monterey Road, which you would get if you don't put the frontage to there, then you then create an issue which is not for the best interest of the city based upon all the other guidance in the Measure S competition and otherwise. So that's important for us to do it. And we think that the feathering can be addressed for you to review and critique at the time. But we think the guidance that you've given us already in the measure under Exhibit B is sufficient to allow us to proceed. Without that this evening, our project is dead in the water for this year. And so I'd appreciate that help this evening and be happy to answer any specific questions. We're not specifically talking about the project, but merely these guidelines, which need to be as flexible as they can so that we have the opportunity to present the best case, to present the best project that complies with our overall goals of making really the projects livable and more consistent with the overall view of Morgan Hill that we're trying to keep. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
I think there might be a
Quick question, if you don't mind, Mr. Oliver. Thank you for your comments. One of the thoughts that I had, which I shared with staff at the end of the meeting, was that if we're going through the effort of this Monterey corridor study and we're doing this block level master plans, et cetera, it's because the city's trying to indicate anyway that Monterey Road is a special place, right? It's going to be this special connector, if you will, for the full peninsula if you look at a broader level. So my interest is around kind of how that private space and the road, the public space interact, and what does that mean? Now, there's some standards obviously for what the road is going to look like, and as far as setbacks, sidewalks, landscaping, etc. But what are your thoughts around just kind of what that means? The spirit behind the Monterey corridor and how that relates to a potential project coming into the site?
Well, I look at Monterey corridor all the way down, and in this high-density downtown, it is very different where you have hotels and restaurants right on the street. You have people eating right on the street. And as you go farther north, we've gotten away with that. We have an existing project, the Monterey Park project, which has houses fronting on Monterey Road. But they're close to Monterey Road, too close, in my opinion. So I take those two suggestions and look at it and said, what do you have to do up here? Well, we have to front some of the houses on Monterey Road, but we have to have a deep enough setback. So we end up creating more of a green space along there that keeps it away, because Monterey Road at that point is almost like a racetrack. Really, the traffic is. So we have to be sure that it works for the community that's going to live in there. And the fact that we have an historic monument of some sort right here, the old school, and that's in a viable commercial use. And when the consultant came to the city and did the studies on this, I said, commercial will work on that corner because it exists. It does work on there. So we leave the balance of it, which is now a non-conforming use, so to speak, a RV storage place, for some future use of commercial. But that, when you do that one, then you'll be able to really fix up this part of Monterey right now, because right now there's a sidewalk there, and there's not a whole lot we can do to that, because it's a sidewalk, some trees, and then walking into Jeffries. And so that's going to remain. We can't change that at this point. So all we can do on this project then is provide possibly some easements, so that when this later, 10 years from now, develops on Jeffries, now it gets redeveloped as commercial, some easements right on this corner to be sure that the homeowners at that time can't stop you from creating the kind of integration that you want for pedestrians, gathering space right at that corner, which is where it has to be. And so the other issue we have is we have to create that road that bifurcates the project. And so all of a sudden we have this bifurcating Tilton Avenue, which is important. It's got to be an important feature, but it's got to work into the community so that the open spaces work with that. And so you can develop a project that works well and still keep Monterey Corridor finished off in a way that really looks nice and developable.
Thank you.
I had a follow-up question. So when you're looking at planning for this project, are you taking into account the realignment that's going to be in the middle? So are you going to have some type of easement there as well, or is that something that's going to happen down the road?
The alignment is going to be a street. We have to put in Tilton Avenue.
Okay.
Tilton Avenue will be improved all the way to right across the site.
Okay.
And so in the future time, this piece, by the way, is not in the city. And it is likely to be, from my perspective, because you have mobile homes here and here, those are your primary affordable housing areas that you never want to lose in the city. There's going to be some push 20 years from now to get rid of those. But frankly, that's where your affordable housing, you don't want to lose that. And it may well be that this becomes another smaller mobile home park or some other better use that works in it at the time. But that piece is probably at least 5 to 10 years away. But it still has to be annexed and go through LAFCO.
Okay. Yeah, so I wasn't sure whether or not that's something you're going to do now or down the road,
No,
20, 30 years from now.
we will put the road
Okay.
through at that point.
And then talking about the buffers, in your opinion, what would be some type of good areas to have buffers other than the
Well,
northwest corner of the lot?
The buffering that was done across the street was to keep the buildings back a distance. So our thought was to keep the buildings back at least 70 feet back here. So the buildings are set back. And that the buffering is in this feathering where there's a higher building perhaps, higher density here and lower as you go down. So there's actually kind of a feathering as you go down the street. So there may be just 2-story houses here, 3 stories, maybe 3.5 story, something like that kind. So you do get a feathering, and you sense it as you go down that it is changing.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Hadley, you did have a question about the railroad, high-speed railroad, and I didn't mention that to you, but there is an exhibit that has in the city files on the last presentation by the high-speed railroad that the blended option is the viable option along this area here, and that is if an existing 60-foot right-of-way, and there's approximately, we measured this afternoon, about 74 feet from the railroad in the existing right-of-way, from the street to the fence on the west side of the railroad tracks. There's about 72 feet from there to Monterey Road. And so I think within that area, if the railroad should go there, and I surely hope that it doesn't, it would be within the right-of-way under the blended option, which is what they have to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
There are no more speakers.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Oliver. All right. I'm going to, unless there's any other speakers, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay. Right, commissioners. Other comments, questions, feedback?
I'm still as concerned or more concerned about this integration. It talks about plazas and things like that, but how do you make sure that it really integrates? I mean, if that commercial area or that particular project is years off, right, which probably is, if this project comes down and we just have a solid line of or an access or a back alley or something else, how do we integrate it?
Integrate what?
Integrate the housing and that future commercial area, right? So that it's not just a walkway here or a driveway here or that. It's got to be more integrated than that. It's got to develop more of an experience.
Well, the way we look at it is the first foray into integration will be with the residential project, because that will come first. And what we're going to expect of them is to create something that, whether it's open space or some sort of connection, they build half of that connection, and they provide for something that can integrate when that property redevelops. When the commercial side redevelops, that's something that's going to go through a process. It has to be consistent with the PD. It will have to go through design review. Staff will be able to push to create that integration to match up with the other side, just like they will for the residential portion. We'll be able to push them on making sure that they're building something that could work in the future. And we also have the ability through the design review process to elevate to the Planning Commission if we're not seeing what we believe should be done in order to be consistent with the PD. So you're laying that framework to operate, to create the overall development in between. If at some point we do have something like a specific plan done in the future or further form-based guidance, I think that will be the structure that you're thinking should be in this block level master plan. But right now, this is meant to be sort of higher level that will have staff force the issue or the commission force the issue should that come to you in the future rather than right away, with the strict requirements being part of it.
But, okay, maybe I'm not making myself clear. We talked about a little bit like we've done like we did in earlier residential PDs all over the city. If there was a vacant piece of property that was going to be developed, right, or we thought it was going to be developed, we had a preliminary sort of layout that said, here's how the street works, so we made sure we made the street stubs where they could work. It wasn't cast. Are we gonna do the same thing on this commercial area?
Yes. Yeah, and so the subsequent PD master plan would be the time when, presumably, again, as Jennifer mentioned, it would be the residential because they're ready to go. They would have to show us, convince us through the PD master planning process that their project, which they know will have specific details, will work in concept with the adjacent property. Just like we had with older PUDs, whether they were for residential or commercial or mixed use. The first in has to provide not only the details for their project, but has to show, at least conceptually, that it's going to integrate well with the remainder of the block and will develop in such a way that will facilitate the good future development of whatever is left of the block. In this case, it would be the Josephine's parcel.
So what's in the thing under talking about places doesn't tell me that remainder parcel is conceptually laid out in the plan. There's nothing there that says you have to have that.
If it's not there, then we should make it clear that the subsequent PD master plan will be for the block.
Okay.
We could add that.
Yeah.
'Cause that was the intent, and this was modeled after decades of what the city has done up to this point for very similar kinds of developments. We're just calling it something different. This is block level master plan instead of a PUD, but they'll still be going through a zoning amendment to establish their no longer precise plan, but it's a PD master plan for the whole block.
Okay, now the other part that's comfortable with Anthony is they could come in with some sort of part on that, what is now commercial, some mixed use that says we just have Josephine's, that historical building is commercial. And there's nothing in here that says that isn't acceptable, right? And so how do you say it's not acceptable if we haven't given any guidance that there's some level of commercial needed there? And I would think if we ask our retail consultant, they'd say, well, to make commercial really long-term sustainable there is a amount needed.
The amount of commercial? So right now, John, the guidelines, I mean, there's a couple of guidelines. One, we say we maintain the historic building, right? We say we have retail on that corner, correct? Or commercial at least on that corner. But we say nothing else about the rest of that area, how much of that needs to be commercial, right?
That's right. I mean, that's TBD at this point. And that TBD would be potentially addressed through the subsequent PD master plan process, where we can figure that level of detail out. We could decide, done it, we need 10,000 square feet of standalone commercial,
Okay. So
extending
we don't
north
have to
from
decide-
Josephine's.
We don't have to decide or specify that now. We can do that later?
Absolutely not. We don't have to decide that now, because we have this multi-part process that they can't just do something now. Once they get the block level master plan, you can't develop after that. There's more
Okay.
process involved. And that process could be, as Dick mentioned, that's their opportunity to convince this body and ultimately the city council that their project is achieving the things that we want achieved, whether that's spelled out specifically in the block level master plan text or contained in other guiding documents, the general plan, zoning code, design guidelines. There's a lot of work that still has to be done after this. This is just setting the high level expectations for what the block will kind of look like. The northern part will be residential, most likely, although it has the flexibility to allow commercial. The southern little piece will be commercial or mixed use. It could remain that what you see out there today for who knows how long, but if they come in to try to redevelop, then they're going to be subject to the rules that are in place.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion. And what that motion would be ultimately to adopt the resolution before us, change the zoning. And I'm just not sure if within that resolution we should add some provisions regarding our concerns, or if instead we should be addressing those concerns in Exhibit B of the exhibits that are attached as an ordinance to be considered by the City Council. That ordinance would be considered subsequent to a positive action by the Planning Commission. Looking at Exhibit B, it does reflect, John, all of the concerns that were raised, save 3. The 3 that aren't clear to me is certainly the one that was only recently brought up tonight, and that would be something regarding the gateways. The second one is one brought up by Joe. That would be to have in there some appropriate verbiage regarding connection between the residential area and essentially the commercial area. And the third that I just couldn't find would be some kind of verbiage regarding density feathering. I found some verbiage in here, but I'm not sure. It's not clear to me that that means density feathering. It's 6C in Exhibit B. But again, it maybe could be clarified if that was the intent. And if those were just added as into the Exhibit B, I think it captures all of the comments that we had tonight.
Yeah, right there, John, right? Feathering, what does it say? Feathering can be achieved.
So we highlight the 2 general plan policies that are specific, and then the last sentence is feathering can be achieved through a combination of measures, including lowering the density and stories height of the residences and including substantial open space.
Then, John, that's fine. Then it would be the other 2.
So the last one was maybe clarifying that the subsequent PD master plan would be for the intent is that covers the entire block, so we could add some language there.
Well, it would be, if you could scroll up to the top a little bit and stop right about there. Those are the 3 items that we had identified, or that you had really brought to us as specific concerns. The realignment. Number 9 is the high-speed rail. The last one is the green belt. And the other 2 were, again, the connectivity, in future development to ensure connectivity between the residential and the commercial area.
I think that's in C3.
We have...
Is it under 3?
We have this. We ensure a strong connection between the commercial, non-residential, residential.
That's good.
Gathering places within the block.
That would be fine.
But we could add the gateway as a item 11.
If I would propose that, and if it were acceptable by the Commission, I'd be ready then to make a motion to adopt the zoning.
Would you consider a change to 10? I'm not so convinced about this buffering to Coyote Greenbelt. Mr. Oliver made a reference about buffering to buffer, and I too would prefer to see if there's space available that can be used. I'd rather see it within the development itself rather than buffering the buffer, right?
Yeah, I mean,
matters or not, but
this is adequate buffer, and I think Dick was proposing 70 feet, which this body could decide if that's adequate or not, or if that should be somewhere else. But it was just to get to this relatively common feedback that we received that it is Coyote Greenbelt, but yeah, maybe there should be something that acknowledges that on this side of
There needs
the
to be
border.
something on our side that is greatly reduced densities. You don't want to run high density right up against.
But you can decide what that
that's fine.
you can decide what that dimension needs to be. So Dick was saying 70, but maybe it's less. And if that's less, could you then combine some of what you're taking away from that buffer into something that's more usable for the project?
All right. So are you making a motion?
Yeah, I think that verbiage there is fine, and with all the clarification that you provided, I would just suggest you insert the appropriate language to deal with our concern about inappropriate gateway.
So can I ask a question about that? Because there are some guidelines already for gateways. So are we saying that we're designating Block 1 as an official gateway to Morgan Hill? And if so, is that something we can do tonight? Because that to me seems like a separate conversation.
So the answer to the question is no. That's not something that we would be able to do. We could make a recommendation if that's where we wanted to go, but I don't think that's where this body wanted to go in terms of designating this as an official gateway in terms of the capital G gateway that exists in like 8-9 different locations around the city already, including multiple locations on Monterey. It was more of the achieving something through design or building location or other ways to just celebrate that this is an entrance to Morgan Hill.
Yeah,
but
that was my thought, Sean. Something to designate it's Morgan Hill versus a faraway subdivision of San Jose.
Yeah, is that San Jose? Because we currently have a Welcome to Morgan Hill sign
Right. Yeah. Right.
way down the street, which is
No,
kind of
it's
weird.
at Tilton.
When Morgan Hill is a mile up the street.
I agree with what you're saying. I think it should be built into the project. I thought I heard Mr. Oliver say he was going to work with a fairly large green buffer in there anyway, right? Which may do part of that.
Maybe that helps achieve it.
Looks like. In terms of what Wayne was suggesting, I think we need to use, I would a lot rather use the word to integrate the commercial into the neighborhood as opposed to just connection.
I'm not so comfortable with that type of language in this specific block because there's so much concentration already down at that end where Josephine's is. I'm happy with the wording of making sure that there's good connectivity, but I'm not convinced this block is one that's going to be so conducive to real integration as opposed to the next topic that comes up. I'm much more interested in it there, but here I'm not so sure. As long as there's good connectivity into that block, that section, I'm okay.
And again, the Planning Commission will get to decide what that is and how well the project achieves that. So there could be this healthy debate about whatever Dick or someone else comes in to propose, is that achieving the very thing that we're talking about here?
All right, so
the other one is we talked about the plan covers the whole block, and that's not in here anymore.
Well, yeah, I suggested that we add that to this. So we'll make it clear that the subsequent PD master plan has to, even if the specific part of the project doesn't include the entire block, that the PD master plan needs to include everything.
Yep.
But we can add that.
All right, you got that, John?
All right, so there's a motion.
So Rain, can you want to restate your motion?
Well, the motion's really simple. It's really straightforward. I right off the bat, I didn't think we had any option on it. Just made real simple sense. But what we had been talking about is what we wanted to convey to the City Council, and it boiled down to a reaffirmation of what you already have in Exhibit B, as well as what's shown on A, along with still some clarification on this gateway. And I guess it is a little g because it's actually, the term is used in the body of the report. So little g, big G, whatever. That would be my suggestion. The motion would be to include that along with adoption of a zoning amendment from its current zoning to the mixed-use flex plan development, et cetera, establishing a block level master plan for Block 1 of the Monterey Corridor.
Okay. Motion?
Question?
I need a seconder first.
I will second it.
Second.
Go ahead.
Question. So when we're looking at Exhibit A and we look at the open space buffer, is that to scale or is that just some type of general reference of where we should see the open space buffer?
I think you're giving me too much credit. I drew this in PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay.
It is really diagrammatic to illustrate, just like this dashed arrowed line isn't to scale in terms of...
Wait, the road doesn't do that? S?
That took me forever to figure out how to make that. No, probably not. I don't think our city engineer would appreciate this configuration.
So it's more of like a general...
Yeah, it's really an idea. And whether... Yeah. I suggested, well, maybe if this isn't important, we take it out, but even if that's there, Doesn't mean that it
I
absolutely
thought you were
has to
adding
be
a
done.
chicane to Dick's racetrack. He has a racetrack out here, he said, so we could just put a chicane in here.
You need roundabouts and,
Bank turns.
So we got a motion, seconder, any other discussion?
Let's do it.
No? Okay. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
5-0. Thank you.
Could I have a follow-up question to ask of John? John, on that last map, when that road gets realigned, will we be repurposing the existing Burnett south of Block 1?
Yeah, good question. I don't think we figured out what you're talking about from where that future connection happens and
Correct.
in that area.
I'm assuming that if there's any access points into the mobile home, we will keep that open, but it seems like the commercial area to the east of Monterey would be like prime and want that land. You know, could be again.
Yeah, it's definitely, without getting into too much detail, I thought about this a little bit. It's probably something that would at the very least be downgraded from its current configuration to a smaller street, or maybe it's more of a driveway. It depends on, the mobile home has an access point over here, so maybe that's far enough to get in, but then they have maybe this secondary access here. It'll need to be studied. It definitely need to be studied, but
Definitely won't have a light.
Yeah, and there have been no discussions on potential vacations or anything like that at this time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it alters that commercials.
All right. Okay, we'll conclude this agenda item. So, Commissioners, do we need a break? Do we want to keep going?
Nope.
No breaks? Everybody good?
Let's do it.
I
All
can
right.
get coffee.
Mr. Beatty, are you okay to keep going?
Of course.
Unless we want to
Whatever you.
get,
Mr. Chair.
I know, but I'll take one of those cookies.
He needs cookies, apparently.
will not
Joe needs
sleep.
cookies.
so not leaving, just
No.
grabbing some coffee. Well, this should all sound very familiar, but it's
Before
for
you start on
Sure.
block 4 for the record, I did meet with the applicant on this specific block.
So did I.
Thank you for highlighting that. Thank you again, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, John Beatty, Principal Planner with Development Services, just in case people are just tuning in.
John, can I just say, in the interest of time, we don't have to go through anything repetitive here, do we?
I'm going to skip over that, and when I get to those slides that are essentially a repeat of the previous information, I'll just refer viewers, audience members to
Yes.
item number 3,
I was
if
gonna
that's
suggest-
okay with the commission.
For the purposes of video playback, if you could just mention where to go find that information, but let's not do it again, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I appreciate that. But I will have to go over some of the particulars.
That's okay.
In any case, this is a city-initiated zoning amendment for approximately 7.5 acres of property located on the east side of Monterey, opposite Old Monterey Road, from the mixed-use flex zoning district to the mixed-use flex plan development combining district to establish a block-level master plan for Monterey Road corridor, Block 4. Mixed-use flex. Mixed-use flex PD. This general plan land use map shows Block 4 in the context of the surrounding general plan designations, as we discussed in our study session. The properties to the east are industrial, Morgan Hill Business Park. To the west is the fairly new Solera Ranch project in the brown color. And then the red is commercial designation, which is a combination of residential mobile home parks and other non-residential uses. To the south of Block 4 is a public facilities designation that includes the Morgan Hill Community Adult School. Block 4 includes an existing development, the KB Homes Monterey Park project. That PD is incorporated into this proposal by reference. This ordinance doesn't change that existing entitlement. There is no need. So this is some of the repetitive background information that if viewers are interested in, audience members that just joined us, some of this discussion of past events is available in the staff report, as well as the item 4 that just preceded this item on tonight's agenda. As with the previous item, we're reusing the addendum to the Morgan Hill 2035 EIR, and propose that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending City Council consider that addendum in accordance with CEQA and approve the zoning amendment from the mixed-use flex zoning district to the mixed-use flex plan development combining district, again to establish the block level master plan for Block 4. The block level master plan would establish the basic expectations and specific requirements for development of Block 4 through the use of a map such as this Exhibit A from the draft ordinance, as well as Exhibit B, which includes in text form the land use regulations, guidelines applicable to Block 4. This is just an outline of the contents of Exhibit B, including the land use regulations, which is permitted uses, etc., and the subsequent approvals that are required before development can occur within this block, with the exception of the existing development that has its own PD. Similar to Block 1, this specific guidance related to Block 4 has been integrated into the development standards shown in Exhibit B of the ordinance. During the study session before our regular agenda, we had some planning commissioner feedback in terms of some other potential guidance for Block 4, including a statement about density feathering, something about the provision of private open space or public open space, and provision of open space or community accessible facilities to help service the area. And so those are things that we could discuss as we take a look at the specific details of Exhibit B. This is another slide that is repetitive of information that we presented for item 3 for the zoning amendment for Block 1. This refers to the steps associated with the block level master plan PD and PD master plan process, which would be the same for this zoning amendment. Similarly, this is a tentative schedule which shows the parts of the block level master plan PD process as it relates to the current RDCS schedule. So if people are interested in hearing that description of this slide in more detail, you could look in the staff report or the previous item on the agenda. And again, as previously stated, zoning amendments, in order for the city to approve them, we need to make certain findings, these 3 that are listed on the screen. And as was the case with the previous amendment, this proposed amendment to establish a block level master plan is consistent with the underlying mixed-use flex general plan land use designation, and that the PD incorporates the allowed uses and builds upon the development standards that are in the conventional mixed-use flex zoning district. And to help achieve the general plan vision of transforming Block 4 into part of a walkable and bike-friendly mixed-use corridor, the block level master plan provides the additional land use regulations that are consistent with the general plan's urban form policies, highlighting certain requirements such as building design and placement, provision of public gathering places, preserving some of the existing specimen trees that are on the site. And to all of that, the proposed amendment is not detrimental to the public interest, health, safety, convenience, or welfare. And the way the exhibit is, the ordinance is prepared, would not result in an inconsistency with the other zoning code provisions. And this is staff's recommendation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Commissioners?
I
Got a couple
think
questions first for John, but I'll open.
mine is, I think we need to add that same thing about planning the whole area, right? In this particular case, you got two potential problems, right? You got a vacant field between this project and the KB Homes project with a single-family development on it, right? That'll
So,
eventually
Joe, can we do this in, just in this time? So, I want to open for public comment too, but if there's a specific question what John just presented first, because we're going to come back to John again, right? So, do you want to hold that, Lynn, or is there something
Sure,
else here?
whatever.
Well, it's not whatever. I mean, it's like I'm just trying to follow the process here and give people an opportunity to get all the input first. Is that okay? It's okay with everybody else, right? Okay, all right. Okay, so any specific questions for John on what was just presented? And then we'll come back to John again when we open back to our own discussion. No? All right. John, thank you. Do we have public comment?
Jason Bernstein.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you so much for considering our block during today's discussion. I first want to say that we've been working on this project for about 2 years. We were in front of you in November 2017 for a rezone, working to compete in the last RDCS competition. And we're really here today because we're just looking for the opportunity to present a great project. I look at this as a process. The block level master plan is like the bones, and it's really high level. We're looking at what the high level desires are in this area. We're going to be ahead of you again for the RDCS competition, which is getting a little bit more specific, and then we're going to be ahead of you again for our PD zoning if we win allocations, where we can really dive into what this project is going to look like. We're not talking about a specific project tonight. With that being said, there were a couple things I wanted to address. In this area of town, I think density feathering, as discussed in the general plan, is really meant from a more macro view. You could look at it from moving west to east, where you have single-family homes, moving to two-story townhomes, to moving to three-story townhomes on the east side of Monterey. And you can also look at it from moving from denser projects closer to downtown and getting less dense as you move out. This portion of town is really challenging from the density perspective, in that much of the development here occurred before this current general plan, so it didn't necessarily take density feathering into account. And so you have a kind of densities all over the map versus a really clear linear direction of density. As for the public-private integration, I think we're in a unique position where the Planning Commission is discussing commercial on the property that we plan to develop. And so, I heard in the last discussion, how will these two be integrated? Well, we're going to be developing this project as a single piece. We're going to be looking at how that mixed-use area works with the residential, and really looking at the Exhibit A and Exhibit B and making sure it's all integrated. There was an aspect of an Exhibit A and Exhibit B that I thought I could use a little bit more clarity on, particularly the black line here. On Exhibit A, it's listed as landscape/private buffer, private street buffer, which I read as and/or. So again, giving us the flexibility to design a great project and come to you during the next several steps with ideas on how we can make this work great. And then it's not, Exhibit B isn't in the package, but under the specific guidelines for Block 4, it states provide buffer to adjacent railroad right-of-way with internal connections between developments. To me, that's really 2 bullet points. Provide a buffer adjacent to railroad right-of-way and provide internal connections between developments. I think that would provide the greatest flexibility for us to come to you on these next several opportunities with a really creative solution to make sure we have a really great project to present. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I'm not talking about a specific project. We're just looking for the opportunity to compete for RDCS allocations and bring something great and really build out this area of town.
Great, thank you. Questions? So, Jason, apart from what you just outlined, nothing else in what you read is concerning you? You think everything else is okay?
No, I mean, we are eager for this project. We've heard through the last year plus of time that Morgan Hill wants to see mixed use here. I think one other thing that I would say would be, rather than designating a specific area as retail or commercial, we don't know who's going to end up using the space in the end of the day and the end of the project. And so giving us the opportunity to really build a mixed use area that's integrated into a larger project, rather than saying this has to be retail to this depth, I think that would give us more flexibility. That being said, we're happy to find creative solutions, and we're just eager, again, to gain your support.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, wait.
I actually have a question. This is a little bit more specific, but my question is, from a development perspective, is it difficult to make some type of pedestrian path across a railroad?
So at this, it's pretty challenging. I think from a safety perspective, the railroad companies and the railroad owners particularly would be opposed to it. The Monterey actually goes under the railroad track here. And so, there's various commitments we can make, and we'd be happy to work with staff and Public Works to figure out the best pedestrian connectivity.
Okay, yeah, and the only reason I brought that up is because I know down the road that there is a project that would be making, I think, a soccer field and some other open areas right adjacent to the property to the east of that railroad track. And I was thinking maybe if there were some ways of directly connecting individuals in this area or other areas to go across to that potential open space. My other question was, along the railroad, there are several old growth trees and things of that nature. In your opinion, is that something that's restrictive for construction? Or can you speak on that?
Sure. I definitely know that City Council in particular has expressed great concern for saving as many trees out here as possible. We're happy to work with staff and City Council and Planning Commission, and we're already starting studies to look into where the trees are located and what impacts they might have from development, so we could plan around that.
Okay, yeah, and because I know we identified, I think, 2 major trees along Monterey, but it wasn't mentioned along the railroad side. And finally, my last question was about mostly railroad safety per se, because if you drive by this area and you look at the railroad, it looks like there's nothing in between the land and the railroad. So when you do develop something that is right adjacent to a railroad, I'm assuming that there would be some type of barriers or things like that in place to prevent children or anything like that to cross over?
Correct. This would actually be our 3rd project along railroad tracks in Morgan Hill alone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jason. All right, any other speakers?
There are no more speakers.
Okay, we close the public comment, and let's go back to Commissioners. Joe, you'd started a conversation with Mr. Beatty here. Could you want to start it again?
Well, all I was saying is, and Jason partially answered it, in that we're going to have his whole project, they're looking to do the commercial with it, I think. Now, as I recall, there's a fairly good-sized piece that's vacant that has one home on it between this project and the KB Homes project. Now, are we going to expect them to, at a minimum, show how the street connection might work if there's any flexibility left? Because I think it was already set to put the street way at the back. But
Yes, so absolutely. I mean, we would expect whatever is established with this project, the project that Jason City Ventures is working on, to establish what that connection would look like, and how, if the property were to redevelop, could redevelop at a conceptual level at least. The property owners currently have no interest in developing. They like their single-family home on their big 0.8 acre lot, and they don't even mind. I believe they were supportive of the KB Homes project, and they've expressed some support for something happening on the site to the north that City Ventures may develop.
And then my other one would be that we really make sure that this is done in such a way that this integrates into this project, but makes nice connections or draws people in from the adjacent projects by the environment it creates. And to me, that's more than what is said by talking about places in this. You got to look at it as more than just connection. A sidewalk here and there.
Yeah, and I think that's where you give the applicant, the developer, a chance to show their creativity and how that's going to play out with a very specific development. We have the benefit in this case that they control the majority of the developable area, including the area that we're expecting some commercial or mixed use to occur. It does have some challenges, but there are also some opportunities with the preservation of the existing specimen trees, especially the ones at the corner of the new intersection with Monterey.
John,
you might be able to do cool things there.
In your exhibit here, whatever color that is, purple, whatever it is, you've said commercial. Are you saying, is that just an example, or are you specifically saying this is where you're expecting commercial to be, or why is that?
It's what this is saying in diagrammatic form is that, generally speaking, that's where we want to see that type of land use, whether commercial or mixed use, that it would be at the southeast corner of that new intersection.
So, coming back to this, why, right? I mean, here's what I'm asking, why, right? What about if there was a kindergarten, or what about if there was a daycare or something else, right? You say that I don't want it on the roadway. It would be great in the back corner, for example, right? I mean,
okay.
We're not restricting it, right? We're saying the developer come back with some creative ideas like that, or...
You mean in exchange for doing something out on the street?
Hmm?
Maybe. I mean, it would take some creativity, but theoretically they could propose on the orange pieces of the map that allows commercial or non-residential uses. So that use that you're talking about could be anywhere where there's orange, and then the purple part could be their mixed use component, but that mixed use could be mostly residential and with a commercial or non-residential use, if it made sense, more interior to the site. So this doesn't preclude that. It promotes a certain distribution or location of uses that is consistent with what we discussed with our commercial consultant, that maybe this side would be the easier side to be on.
Again, this is just my opinion. Again,
but there's still flexibility.
I'm looking at a specific block in a specific location, right? And I look at what the uniquenesses of that. First of all, it's fairly narrow, right? It's right next to the railway. I mean, relatively narrow, right? It's long and narrow.
Deceiving. I mean, it does get narrow at the top, but it is pretty wide down there.
But I'm just saying, this is a zone where I'd like to see real integration happening, as opposed to just saying, I have a pathway, but I'd like to see real integration. And I don't want to be too specific, because I'd like to say to the developer, bring back a creative idea, right? And we can always debate it later, what we want and don't want. Right. But to be very specific and say, I want it right there, I'm not so convinced that's the right choice for here. That's just my opinion.
Well, again, even being this specific doesn't preclude them from the flexibility that you're talking about. If they present something that still achieves what we're trying to achieve here with a real integration of a mix of non-residential and residential uses, I think this body could support that, and I think the city council could approve something. This is a zoning. If we wanted, we're going to get another zoning map, another Exhibit A to look at, and that Exhibit A could say, this is how we're achieving what the intent of this diagrammatic map is trying to indicate.
Anything else, commissioners?
Well, I'm still very concerned about this shallow depth that we're talking about. I think it's way too shallow to have long-term viable retail or commercial. And we're setting an expectation that 35 feet works. And I don't believe it really works over the long term.
But it doesn't, but we can still control that, right?
That's the minimum, right?
That's the minimum.
It's a minimum.
It's a minimum, but it's a minimum that's so far under what it is that we're setting expectation that, how do we say it's not compliant?
Well, the assumption that that 35 feet is not deep enough is assuming that it's fronting onto Monterey. What if it's a single use that fronts onto this new street?
Yeah.
Then it's plenty deep.
No,
So,
I really don't think so. Every consultant that's come here in front of us that said has viable, real high-class commercial retail space says you need 14 feet clear height and says you need 50 to 60 feet.
right, but what I'm saying is if you turn the use, you have that. 35 feet wide, I don't know how deep that purple lot is, but there are ways to make this work. And as much as you may want a consultant to say, there's general guidance, absolutely 14 feet, general depth, but the market will determine what actually works there. And there were, during initial discussions when this lot's been talked about in the past, it was looked at more as neighborhood retail that everyone could walk to, all these residents in the area, and maybe 35 feet is appropriate for those. It's really the market that will determine that, and it could be that whoever owns the site and develops the site could end up having a user that wants more depth. They're not limited to this purple zone. They'll come in with an overall master plan based on what they think will happen.
And we don't need to solve this tonight. We have another process where we can ask those questions. If we want to ask those questions and have a third-party retail consultant tell us, is what they're proposing really viable? If we're that concerned, we could do that. We can
We'll get their
we
comments
can have
on
that
the
analysis
master
and
plan.
say, look, this is going to work at 40 feet or 50 feet, but not at 35. And that's information that we could bring to you as part of the subsequent process. We don't have to try to solve for it tonight.
Okay, so somebody explain to me how we come in with a preliminary review at 35 feet or 40 feet, and everything that we've been told says that doesn't give you long-term viable space that's flexible. How do we say it's not an agreement?
Well, it would be consistent. So if there's a standard that's in this document and they're consistent with that standard, then they would be consistent enough for them to move on. But you could still provide feedback during the prelim that says, yeah, you may be consistent with the minimum standard, but I believe for the long-term viability, the sustainability of your retail, that depth needs to be 40 feet, and we need some third party to verify what the minimum depth should be. We could do that. You could have those comments. Again, we don't need to try to solve those. In fact, I'm kind of regretting that I put that very specific standard in here, but it was, again, something that we shared with our retail consultant, and she thought, well, yeah, for this particular area and some of the other blocks, that 35 as a bare minimum could be okay, given the type of retail that, or non-residential type of uses that could be out here. But
Other questions, comments, inputs? All right. Would somebody like to make a motion? Wayne, you're good at making motions.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So when we're looking at Exhibit B, the commercial requirements, number 2, where it says tree preservation, my question is, can we maybe put, or should we put some type of language to indicate that an effort should be made, if possible, to preserve the trees, those old growth trees along the railroad? I know it's not. What was that?
Wasn't that noted already?
So the thing that was noted was the existing specimen trees that are along Monterey, the 2 big trees. but nothing was indicated about the trees that line the railroad.
So right now it says the existing specimen trees located in adjacent to the commercial mixed-use area shall be preserved, right?
Yeah, and then if you look at the Exhibit A, it has the indications of the 2 trees they're talking about. And I don't want to limit the development to say that they have to preserve the trees that are along the railroad, but I think we should add some type of language to indicate that some type of effort should be made, if possible, to preserve the other trees.
Should that statement be more generic then, around?
To the extent feasible, other,
Well, the language is fine, it's really just the fact that the 2 that were identified, it's just the 2 that are identified, but the language kind of covers it in broad
Well,
terms.
the language just gets specific in adjacent to the commercial mixed-use area, but maybe we should take that out and just say in general, where possible, or where, what's the right word, John?
Or to make those 2 trees.
stand out.
Oh, is that?
So the purpose of including that provision was to address a city council comment that those specific trees we should highlight as ones to preserve. That doesn't mean to say that the city has other tree preservation ordinance that we abide by, and so if we have other healthy, good trees that work well with a project that could be integrated into the project, we'll do that. I would prefer to have something that refers specifically to those trees on Monterey, and then we could add something that talks about the other trees. If that's the will of the commission, we could.
I think we should
certainly
add
add that.
something like that, but I worry a little bit about using language that says that work well with the project. Because we've had language like that ends up having big trees taken out.
Well,
Because they don't want to.
all trees that are removed have to go through the tree removal process, and they need to be evaluated. And we have an arborist that takes a look at it, and our city arborist peer reviews those arborist reports. And we do have a lot of trees, larger trees in the community that are not doing well, and that's when they come out. We also have a replacement standard, and we usually require more than just that tree to be replanted, and we also require native for native. So we're looking at bolstering those rules at some point, and that will be hopefully coming forward earlier mid this year. That's another department that's working on that. But if you want us, we could certainly put something in there that recognizes all the existing trees on the property and just reference back to any tree preservation policies or existing ordinances.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure how we should go about it. It's just the fact that I recognize that there's other trees there as well that look pretty old growth when you go in person and see them, and they are pretty much along the line already of where there's a proposal of having a tree or landscaping buffer, and that's the reason I actually brought it up, is because rather than having an option of just removing them and putting some type of new landscaping buffer, that I think that there should be some type of effort to preserve the trees that are already there.
We could certainly add that language, endeavor to preserve any old growth trees as
So John,
possible,
will you
or-
take an action then on C2, just to reword that so it covers just more than some specific trees, right?
I was proposing to add a
Plus.
separate
Right.
sentence.
I'll cover specific trees plus.
Right.
Plus, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
okay.
I'll add some.
All right,
I think
anything
it's
else?
a good idea.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to just say, are we going to do anything with these public gathering spaces that talk about how this integrates with this neighborhood and others?
Which section, Joe?
E.
Huh? Which section?
E.
E?
I mean, there's gathering spots in the residential development itself, but in here, I think we're really talking about how it interfaces with the mixed use and how that mixed use works with the neighborhood plus the adjacent ones.
So what were you proposing?
Sorry, would E3, visibility and access, kind of address that? Where it says plazas, courtyards, and other similar spaces must open to public sidewalks and building entrances to provide visibility and access?
That's just talking about access.
So, do you have a
There's some
specific,
design aspects here too.
Joe, do you have a specific suggestion? Something you want to add, change?
Go ahead for a second. Let me look and see if there's one particular one. I don't know. To me, integration is more about maybe you've got vertical mixed use on the site and how that plays with it, how it generates a plaza that opens up. I don't necessarily know exactly how to do this, but this didn't, when I read it, it didn't feel like it was integrated. It feels like it was a whole bunch of things that were put together, but it didn't quite pull it all together. I don't know.
Again, this doesn't have to try to solve those kinds of details yet. It just has to provide enough guidance that we think public gathering place is important enough to require projects of a certain size, which this would be, and that these are kind of the general guidelines in terms of location, what kind of activities are expecting, visibility, access, use. We have a item about the specimen trees being incorporated into the design of these spaces. And then the applicant gets to try to take their best shot at representing what this means, and then you all get the chance to review that and say, yeah, that's, you've captured that really nicely, or no, we think you need to go back to the drawing board, but it's good enough to get you down the road. But we're going to expect better things maybe during the PD master plan process.
Okay, but maybe here's what's bothering me. This says public gathering places. To me, there's gathering places that are meant for the this residential project.
Absolutely, and that's not this.
Okay, then how do we separate that when it just says public gathering places? How do we make sure that we're talking about just the area of the non-residential, or the outline of the non-residential, and not halfway across the project where they got their private park and they're putting particular things in there that are really meant for residents?
Well, some of that has to do with the visibility and access. So if a project is going to have those things, but if it's, in some ways, it'll be really clear that those are areas that are meant for the residents. Even if the developer wants to open those up and allow them to be available to the public, sometimes those just don't make sense. But where they do make sense is when you're close to a public street, you're close maybe to Monterey. That's where at least I'm envisioning these public gathering places will be achieved.
So
I'm back to the neighborhood to me, but
How is this turning the back to the neighborhood when those public gathering places are front and center? They're there right at the public street. How do you take what's described here and apply it to something that is wholly within a project and that is not accessible to the public? That's not what this is.
So maybe
this is something different.
So, let's try and come to a conclusion here. So, I'm okay with these guidelines because I'm trying to keep it fairly as a guideline, and the next waves that come back with details, that's where we'll have an opportunity to sort of get a lot more specific. I'm okay with the language as it is right now. If you've got a proposal to change something, please put it on. Otherwise, we're probably going to move to a motion here. So,
Mr. Chair, the one concern I had that was raised in the workshop that we had to do with adequate public spaces. We had talked about maybe a park, open space, I don't know what, but it really needed to fit in with what we should have in this general area, which seems to really be short in terms of places for kids to play in. Your thought on that? Should that be a requirement for this block plan, or?
It's something that we could certainly try to address. I think In terms of the residential, if we're trying to solve for the needs of the development itself, I think that will get worked out. What this is trying to accomplish is providing something for the benefit of the greater public, the greater neighborhood, if you will. Whether this gets to that or not, there's only so much we can expect from a development. I don't believe that a development of this size we're going to get a public park, and that this wouldn't generate enough residential for us to demand that. But with a development like this, I think we could get a public gathering place.
Or John, your thoughts on the private parks? You know, there's several examples in the area that people seem to really use.
Yeah, those private parks are for the private residents, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's what he's referring to, I think.
And so, right, so on that side of the equation, I think the project will need to address the needs of its residents through the provision of private open space areas, common open space areas, as well as any private open space areas that are associated with individual units. But to require a public park space, a traditional park for the greater good, I don't think this site would generate that on its own.
Can I just add one other thing? So also in the Parks Master Plan, the Parks Commission has indicated that they don't want to have any more smaller parks. They're very difficult for maintenance, even if you have some kind of a maintenance agreement or some kind of assessment district, et cetera. They have really put their sights on limiting the number of smaller public parks. So gathering spaces that might be located, I think, up to the front of the street as you're walking down a sidewalk and there's a place to stop and be in kind of a public context is one thing. Having a full public park, although that's what I want to do with that big tree. And I've had this conversation with Parks and Rec a lot about that particular issue. It just is not how Parks and Rec sees themselves functioning and setting direction, and that in fact is not where our master plan takes us. So,
okay. I'm just wondering, since you're up there, Leslie, is there a plan for a park, a public park in this area of the city?
yes, there's a plan for a huge public park that'll be across the railroad tracks. So you just walk under the trestle and it'll be 4 acres, John? 3.5 acres at the M West project. And it'll be active. It'll be an active park.
Mm-hmm. To push you a little bit further, is anything planned on the to the west of the railroad tracks? Any public parks? It happens to be an area I'm very familiar with. I think several commissioners live in that area as well, but there isn't anything over there.
I don't know that they've identified a particular park space. I can't tell you that I've read the plan to see whether they've targeted assembly of any other open space areas. So I can't answer the question for you. Sorry.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Are we ready?
Ready to make a motion?
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the zoning amendment to add a plan development combining district, establishing a block level master plan for Monterey Road Corridor, Block 4, et cetera, with the noted language changes that we mentioned around trees specifically. And I forget, Commissioner Tanda, what your original intent was, as well as there was something else about
John, what else did you note there?
up some of the language.
So we'll add the preservation of trees and then the clarification that the subsequent PD master plan will be for the block.
For the block, right. Okay. Yeah.
What about feathering?
So that's an excellent question for the rest of the commission. Is that's still an overall general plan policy? Is it important enough in this context to daylight that in the text of the zoning, as the speaker, as Jason had mentioned earlier. If we go by the context of what's been approved out here, the densities are all over the place. I mean, there's no, even though the density feathering policy has been in the general plan for decades, it's in the current, it was in the previous, and may even have been in the one before that. How that was applied to various projects in this area.
Okay, so we already have a requirement for density feathering. Is there something specific you want to add, Joe?
Well,
is there? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm making the motion, so unless we have a second, it can die, or we can discuss it.
Sure,
But
sure, you're right.
at this point, I was not planning on including any specific language around feathering in my motion.
Okay, so you
just
have
to
your
be clear.
motion. So we have a motion. We have a second motion. Second. So, discussion.
I think we're ready for a vote.
Discussion. All right. So we're ready to vote. Okay. So we have a motion. Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Did you vote, Joe?
No.
No. Are you going to vote?
Yeah.
No.
No, because I don't think we've got the integration on the space.
So your vote is no.
Okay, 4-1.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So it's 4-1. Okay. Great. All right. John, is there anything else on this topic? Can you see here?
No. Thank you. We'll be back before you at some point for continued discussions about the balance of the corridor. Thank you very much.
Nice
Thank
job.
you, John.
Nice job, guys.
You're going to see
Thank you.
feathers in your dream tonight, John.
Right.
All right, we will make this very quick. Gina Paulini, back again.
The lights on for you?
So as you know, Commissioner, or now Councilmember McKay and Martinez Beltran have now been appointed to the City Council, and so we need a vice chair for our commission. So I've attached the policy to your report, and Commissioner Habib is next in line if he so chooses to be selected. So that's what we're here to discuss.
Okay.
And with that said, I would like to actually defer my appointment if I can. The reason being is I have new family commitments and responsibilities that came up recently, as well as work responsibilities and commitments. However, I do intend on taking the next opportunity that comes up once everything on my side is taken care of. And I did speak to Juan about that as well.
Okay. So the procedure is?
Then Juan would be the next in line.
Are there any options we have? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. That's a joke.
Prepare yourself, Mr. Chairman.
If he so chooses.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Munoz as our vice chair.
Second.
You okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. We spoke earlier. He explained the situation. I'm fine with that.
Okay. We have a proposal. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do I say aye? Aye.
Joe, did you vote?
I'm not sure if I'm
Good.
supposed to
Okay.
vote on myself or not.
Okay. Very good. We have a vice chair. Congratulations. I'm out of here. I was
Thank
kidding.
you. Yeah, you can rest easy now.
So, staff, any other announcements?
No. Is this on?
Thanks, Gina.
A detailed director's report. But we came so close to 10 o'clock, just a couple minutes after, so, but progress.
See, 55 minutes, told you.
So I just wanted to mention, I did send an email to everyone a while ago. I've only heard back from one commissioner. We're just trying to update our maps and confirm that everything is correct because we did have one incorrect address. And so I'm just double checking with everyone that you haven't moved since you've joined the commission and whether or not you own any property within the city limits, just so that we can do conflicts checks.
I replied to you, right, didn't I?
You did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Stephanie, can you give us a status of the interviewing and appointment of the new commissioners?
We've had one applicant. The council chose to wait to do interviews until there's a few more.
Okay.
haven't seen much public notification about it or chatter about it. Where are we publicizing it?
It's gone out on social media. It's also posted. And we have a lot of folks talking to folks and doing internal recruitments, from what I understand. So if you know anybody, if anyone out there is watching and interested, please apply.
We have the names of the still have the names of the applicants from last time. There was one or two that were quite impressive.
They were, our city clerk was going to reach out to them and see if they were still interested.
I love that we reached out to the literally some viewers that we have online somewhere.
You never know.
That's true. That's true.
Okay.
And a question regarding protocol. With 5 commissioners, is the majority vote on any commission item based on who is in attendance, or is there a minimum number of 4 that have to vote affirmatively?
It depends on the item. For most of the items, it is a majority of who's present, but on, I think it was zoning amendments. Zoning amendments, our code specifically states it's a majority of the members of the commission.
Okay, and minutes, as I recall, also require.
Minutes, I think, is just simple majority of whoever's present.
Well, I don't think so. We had a big discussion on that one time, and
Okay, well, I'm not aware of any law that requires anything more than just a majority of who's present, but if you'd like me to research that, I can do
could
that.
you confirm that? Because
Sure.
I thought it was odd that day that we did that.
And I do recall the conversation, and I remember that you were not happy with the answers that we were giving at that time.
No, I was just very confused. I've never heard of that before.
Those questions went to whether or not somebody who was not on the commission could vote for minutes from a time when they were not at a meeting. And because we didn't have enough people still on the commission to approve the minutes, we had to have them approved in some way. And so there are certainly
There was also
is
nothing
exceptions.
preventing us from voting on those minutes, because the assumption is that you've reviewed them, and to the best of your knowledge, you can cast a vote, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, are we adjourned?
You tell us.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
You're the chair. You tell-